and anybody who comes in. We're going to do our best to hear from all of you as well. Just by way of introduction, my name is Edward Ra. I'm the Assemblyman for the 19th District and also the ranking member on the minority side on the Education Committee. We are doing today the first of a series of forums on the implementation and Common Core in New York. We will be having another hearing in 2 weeks in Nassau County at SUNY Old Westbury, and we'll be announcing dates in the near future for some other forums we're going to be doing throughout New York State. Really, we're doing this obviously in response to a lot of feedback we're getting from our constituents who want to make sure they have the opportunity to be heard on this, whether they be educators, parents, the impact this is having on their children, on their students, and it's certainly something that we're very concerned with as members of the Education Committee and representatives of Long Island, a place that has always had very high achieving schools that have done well, and we think that a lot of what's going on, rather than helping them do better, is dragging them down instead, which is not obviously the result we want. So before we call up the first speaker, I just want to quickly give an opportunity to my colleagues here, both members of the Education Committee. Assemblyman Al Graff, sitting to my left here, is kind of co-organizing these forums with me. And he's getting up, so I'll let Al just give a quick introduction.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. There will be other assemblymen coming in and out during the forum. The 3 representatives you have up here, we're all on the Education Committee, as Ed has said. So I'm looking forward to hearing the testimony from everyone. We had demanded hearings from the Committee on Education for the Assembly. We sent a letter from every member of our side for the to the committee chairwoman, but there was no response. We felt it was important to reach out to the communities and reach out to the regions, because I think that education, what we're doing with the Common Core personally, I see a lot of problems with it. There are a lot of people out here that have worked on this. We've petitioned the state to actually get involved and take a look at Common Core. And what I can say to date, we have 10,638 signatures that went to the governor. So I think this is an issue. We're not going to be quiet about it. We need your input today. And I think there's a real problem with the implementation of Common Core the way it is. So I'm still trying to figure out why a first grader has to point out where Mesopotamia is on a globe. So with that, thank you for coming today. We're looking forward to hearing your views and your testimony on the subject.
And also my colleague from Nassau County, Dave McDonough, who of the 3 of us is the longest tenured member of both the Assembly and the Education Committee, and he's joining us today as well. Dave?
Thank you, Ed. And let me just follow up with what Assemblyman Al Graff said when he said 10,000 plus signatures. There are several other groups out there that have been gathering signatures too. So, Al, I think you can easily double that number right now, because I know they've been sent also. Common Core has been a problem, but the problem was not that they didn't listen to the Education Committee or the education community. They didn't ask, and that was the problem. So let's hear what you people have to say. Thank you very much.
And with that, we're going to get started. Just quickly, everybody that's signed up to speak, I know many of you have and will be submitting written testimony. We're going to ask that you do your best to summarize your written testimony rather than reading it into the record, because we have it in written form, and that'll certainly help with getting the hearing going and making sure we can speak and hear from as many people as possible. We do have some folks on staff that are going to be keeping time, and they'll be holding up just some cards to let you know where you are in terms of time on speaking. But we're going to call up the first speaker, which is Ms. Mary Calamia from Stony Brook, New York. Calamia, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Did not expect to be first. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm a psychotherapist. I work with parents, children, and about half of my caseload is teachers also. My caseload represents about 20 different school districts in Suffolk County. In the summer of 2012, my elementary school teachers started to report increased anxiety over having to learn 2 entirely new curricula for math and ELA. And that was when I first heard about the change to the curricula to a one-size-fits-all, taking the imagination and innovation out of the hands of the teachers. In the fall of 2012, my phone started ringing. I started getting an inordinate number of referrals of students, a lot of honors students, 8th graders mostly, who were self-mutilating. They were cutting themselves with sharp objects, and they were burning themselves with cigarettes. My phone never stopped. And I didn't know why. I asked the kids, and all they kept saying was, "We can't take the pressure, it's too much." I also started getting a lot of elementary school students referred to me. They were refusing to go to school. They said they felt stupid and that school was too hard. They were throwing tantrums, begging to stay home, and upset to the point of vomiting. I was hearing from parents about kids bringing home homework they couldn't help them with. I was alarmed to hear that in some cases there were no textbooks for the parents to look at, and they had no idea what their children were learning. The teachers were reporting a staggering level of anxiety and depression, and that was when I first heard the term Common Core and learned about the standards that we now say set the bar so high anyone can walk right under it. Everyone was talking about the tests. As the school year progressed and the tests loomed, my patients were increasing their self-mutilating behaviors. They were complaining of insomnia, panic attacks, loss of appetite, depressed mood, and in one case, suicidal thoughts that resulted in a 2-week hospital stay for an adolescent. I don't know of any formal studies that connect these symptoms to the Common Core, but I really don't think we need to sacrifice an entire generation of children just to get the correlation. The Common Core and high-stakes testing is creating a hostile working environment for teachers and consequently a hostile learning environment for students. When I first heard about the Common Core, APPR, and high-stakes testing, my first thought was, who is going to rate the parents? I see children and teenagers who are exhausted, running from activity to activity, living on fast food, then texting, using social media, and playing games well into the wee hours of the morning on school nights. We have children taking cell phones into the classrooms, tweeting and texting each other all day. We have parents, and yes, parents, who are texting their children during the school day. Let's add in bullying and cyberbullying that torments our children, even to the point of suicide, and the interminable drug problem that we have. And these variables affect student performance, and we make the teachers responsible for their performance. The SED holds them accountable, substituting innovation and individualism with cookie-cutter standards, believing that's going to fix our schools. We can't regulate biology. Young children cannot engage in the type of critical thinking that the Common Core calls for. That would require a fully developed prefrontal cortex, a part of the brain that is not fully functional until adulthood. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for critical thinking, rational decision-making, and abstract thought, all things that the Common Core requires prematurely. We give children pre-assessments, tell them to succeed, and then give them tests on material they haven't learned and tell them it's okay to fail. They cannot resolve that mixed message. Last spring, a 6-year-old encountered a multiplication sign on the NWEA first grade math exam and asked the teacher what it was. The teacher was not allowed to help him and told him to just do his best. From that point on, the student's test performance went downhill. He couldn't shake off the unfamiliar symbol and couldn't believe his teacher wouldn't help him. The Common Core requires children to read informational texts that are owned by a handful of corporations. They don't have a filter to distinguish good information from bad. So whatever you put in front of them, they take that as gospel. They're literal. So when we give them a textbook that explains the Second Amendment as the people have the right to keep and bear arms in a state militia, they will look no further for clarification. We ask them to write critically using emotionally charged language to persuade instead of inform. They don't have that functional prefrontal cortex, so they tap into their limbic system, which is the part of the brain that involves basic human emotions, anger and fear being the foremost. So when we ask them to use emotionally charged language, we're actually asking them to fuel their language with fear and anger and aggression. They cannot temper this judgment. They don't have the ability to do that. So we teach to the test, which I think doesn't really measure learning. I think the tests measure endurance and resilience. Only a child who can sit still for 90 minutes, come back the next day and do it again, and the next day again, can succeed. I'm going to introduce you to a couple, I'm almost done. I'm going to introduce you just a couple of student stories, okay? A couple of the faces of the Common Core. We have an entire third grade class that spent the entire day sobbing after one testing session. A second grader who witnessed this is now in third grade and won't go to school. She's being evaluated, a 7-year-old being evaluated for psychotropic medication just to get her to go to school. A 6-year-old who came home crying because in September, in the first grade, she didn't know what a vertex was. 2 8-year-olds opted out of the ELA exam and were publicly denied cookies because the teacher gave them to the class but wouldn't give them to them. And that teacher, who under duress, felt obligated to do such a thing. A 6th grader who once aspired to be a writer but now won't do it because we do it all day long, even in math. And a mother who has to leave work early because her son is hysterical over his math homework, and his CPA grandfather who's babysitting for him can't even help him do it. And countless other kids who are refusing to go to school, feel stupid, and now are completely turned off to education. I will conclude with this one thought. Our country became a superpower on the backs of men and women who learned in one-room schoolhouses. This isn't rocket science. It doesn't take a great deal of technology or corporate or government involvement to help our children to succeed. We need to rethink the Common Core and the associated high-stakes testing and get back to the business of educating our children in a safe, healthy, and productive manner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your opinions on this with us today, because this really is, I think, part of the crux of the issue. We can talk a lot about the educational standards and reaching certain standards and everything, but these are human beings. They're not robots. The teachers aren't robots, and if it was as simple as some might want to make it to be, maybe that's what we would have, robots teaching the kids or something like that, because when a child gets discouraged about education, we've lost them at that point. And until we get them back on track, they're just not going to learn the same. They're not going to absorb the information. So I think it's very important that you added that, to add your voice today. Just one quick question. As I've talked to a lot of my constituents, we heard a lot about the testing last spring, and now what I'm hearing a lot about is a kid that most years goes to school, they're excited about a new school year, and now we're ramping up the instruction, because as we know, we started with teaching something, testing something that the children have never been taught, but now we're getting into the teaching side of it and the rapid pace of it, and teachers not feeling like they have the ability to slow it down to make sure all the children are absorbing the information. So I'm just wondering, if you've seen any type of different impact from the testing itself as opposed to the pace of the instruction.
The testing, at testing time, I can say that my kids and my teachers were in a total anxiety state. The kids were a wreck. And no matter how many times we sat down and told them they're not really testing you, that scores aren't going to count, this is really about seeing how much you've learned and how well the teachers, it just didn't matter. The kids were an absolute wreck. And I didn't really know about the Common Core last September, but when they were taking the pre-tests and coming in and they kept telling me, I'm taking my final exams on material, kids who were taking Spanish were looking at a language they didn't even know, and I was baffled, and they were baffled, and I just didn't even know what to say to them at that point. But the anxiety level around September and like March, April, when the tests were being given, through the roof. Not sleeping, stomach ache, I don't want to go. Parents who were opting out their kids but terrified to opt their kids out. It was just, and the teachers were a wreck.
Okay. Thank you, Al.
Is this on?
There you go.
Okay. Now, in your profession, you've taken courses on child development, and you've been exposed to some of the questions or the curriculum that the kids are going to, that they're supposed to be able to handle, correct?
Yes.
Have you looked at some of the curriculum?
Yes, I have.
And you've
mostly the math I've seen.
Right, and you study, and, in attaining your degree, you studied child development.
Yes, that is correct.
And are you finding that what they're asking these kids to do is developmentally, appropriate for these children?
I strongly believe that a lot of it is developmentally inappropriate. Especially this focus on persuasion and persuasive writing and arguing basically, is developmentally inappropriate. When a child's prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, they tap into the limbic system. The limbic system is it's like primal, it's basic, and it's really fully charged by the flight or fight, adrenaline rush, anger, fear, and that's what they tap into. And so that's where we see all of the anxiety, and that's where we see a lot of acting out behaviors.
Okay.
They can't persuade at that age.
Yeah. Percentage-wise, how big of an increase have you seen with kids coming into your office?
Oh, it's at least doubled. At
Okay.
least doubled, if not more.
And are you seeing teachers also?
Yes.
And what's the percentage of an increase of teachers that you're now?
I would not say I've had a percentage increase in teachers referred to me. I've had a percentage increase, or I've seen a huge increase in their symptomology. I've had teachers who were almost ready for discharge, who are now medicated, who are, stepping up their therapy. I had them maybe down to every other week, who have now had to increase to weekly sessions. So there's most definitely a strain on them. Usually, come August, I start to hear kids and teachers saying to me, I'm starting to get bored, I'm getting ready to go back. This August, they were, I don't want to go back. Teachers sick to their stomachs about having to go back to work.
Okay, and now these children with the self-mutilization, did they have a history of that before
No,
this?
no prior history. I mean, I've had children who were self-mutilating. This is not a new phenomenon. It's the sheer volume of the number of kids that were coming into my practice, and it wasn't just from one school with one kid teaching other kids. It was coming from every district. And my office is in Stony Brook. I service at least 20 different districts. And every district, every middle school, high school, junior highs in some districts. It wasn't unique to one school.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Before we call up the next speaker, I just want to say we've been joined by our colleague in the Assembly, one of our newer guys, Chad Lupinacci, who is certainly no stranger to education, having served on a school board prior to his election and teaching at the college level as well. So I know he's been very passionate about the subject of education, and we're glad he's here with us today. We're going to call up from the Middle Country District if the school board president, Dr. Karen Lesler, and Dr. Roberta Gerald of the superintendent of the Middle Country District. If you guys can come up together, and then we'll hear your testimony one by one.
I want to thank the members of the New York State Assembly for giving myself and other education leaders an opportunity to share our perspectives on Common Core and high-stakes testing. My name is Karen Lesler. I'm currently a secondary social studies teacher as well as a school board president beginning my 14th year. I have a doctorate degree in education in which I completed a 4-year dissertation on whether high-stakes testing improves student academic achievement. And I can say with confidence, supported by a substantial body of data, that high-stakes testing does not improve student academic achievement. My research did discover was that highly effective teachers, and I mean really highly effective teachers, and not those that are defined by these Heidi scores, increases academic achievement among students. I'll do my best to answer your questions in reference to the topics you posed in your letter. First, the Commissioner, along with the Board of Regents, put the cart before the horse. By testing first and then implementing the Common Core curriculum, they demonstrated a clear exertion to have schools fail. There is no methodology within the education research community that would validate this approach. Moreover, there has been over 25 years of research conducted by leading education researchers like Linda Darling Hammond and Diane Ravitch, who have shown high-stakes testing does not improve student achievement. What was enacted in New York State is a teach to the test system, which promotes the unintended consequences of a narrow curriculum, loss of developmentally appropriate instruction, teacher loss of control, and a greater financial burden to the school districts. Moreover, the Commissioner lacked the understanding as to how his policies would affect an educator's ability to reach their goals directly related to helping students succeed within the classroom. At no time did the SCD produce conditions for an understanding of the Common Core. My recommendation is for the SCD to refocus on the development of age-appropriate instruction and curriculum across all disciplines. Secondly, I recommend that the SCD create a plan that will support the implementation of professional development for all teachers in New York State. Provide them with the resource, give them the workshops that they need to incorporate Common Core and allow time to shift into these instructional practices. Secondly, to stop the test and punish system that has been enacted within APPR. The Danielson and the NISIC rubric were meant as frameworks for teaching. It was not intended to assign scores and punish teachers. According to Danielson, and I quote, "The framework may be used for many purposes, but its full value is realized at the foundation for professional conversation among practitioners as they seek to enhance their skill in this complex task of teaching." The recommendation here is to roll back the 20% student growth and allow school districts to develop their own district-provided growth measure. Moreover, the SCD should refocus their entire agency by providing professional development and support to superintendents and administrators who can reevaluate teacher evaluations and student achievement. APPR is not the approach to solve that problem. Consider Finland. In an article, Learning from Finland, Patsy Salzberg highlights reasons of why Finland's educational system is successful. And it's rooted in a high regard and strong support of their teachers, and allowing local school districts are given great independence. If our own SCD continues to demoralize teachers and students through high-stakes testing, not applying, quote, high regard and strong support for educators and students as the Finns do, with tremendous academic results, I must say, will be left with the opposite of the SCD's objectives. Thirdly, removal of state testing. The pressure of high-stakes testing exerts tremendous stress on students and teachers. Elected officials are incorrect to think that high-stakes testing is a tool for school reform. The major mistake with policymaking is we inherently believe in top-down policy reform. This mistake continues to be the fundamental problem with public education. Education reforms have not been successful simply because education policies are enacted on the premise that either there's a silver bullet or test and punish. Both do not work. And we know this even going back to 1983 with regards to A Nation at Risk. All high-stakes testing does is create anxiety and stress for students and teachers. Teachers feel pressured to teach to the test. Teachers feel pressured to ignore other parts of the curriculum. And it also causes this standardized writing and reading, which creates very unnatural environments and what researchers Nichols and Berliner call compliance to the rubric. This is not the method to develop critical thinkers. The recommendation here is to reduce the testing. First, reduce the amount of time students are being tested. 540 minutes in combined ELA and math is not age appropriate. Allow teachers and administrators to create their own assessments. The SED should use school districts' data to improve their curriculum and their instructional support. No test and punish school districts. Let's consider Finland's approach. And their approach is students don't take standardized tests. Which leads me to my final comments about what Diane Ravitch calls the hoax of the privatization movement and the danger to America's public schools. How did we get this far without asking the difficult questions at the start of implementation of APPR, high-stakes testing, and the Common Core curriculum? How did we come to entrust Commissioner King, David Coleman, the architect of Common Core, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to decide what's best for our children? Where is the rationale that age-appropriate instruction is not important? How did the Board of Regents approve the Common Core when it was never piloted? How did we implement a narrow methodology of reading comprehension and believe that's the only thing we need? And how did we leave out educators and administrators, superintendents, and school board members during the implementation of all these policies? How can the state of New York entrust our children to what is emerging to be a political self-serving move to privatize and dismantle public education? You know as well as I do that public education is the great equalizer. It's the door to opportunities for every single child in America. Will the private sector companies be the great equalizers, or will profit prevail over our children? I am very appreciative that the New York State Assembly is holding these hearings, and I hope you return to Albany better prepared to ask the difficult questions, because we're counting on you to be our voice, because no one else is. Robin Meehan said, and I leave you with this, we are not just teachers, we are managers of the world's greatest resource, and that's children. Like most teachers that you've heard, I truly believe I am more than just a teacher. I believe the work in the classroom is the heartbeat of America. I also believe that policymakers need to start believing this too, and realize that the SED should be the support staff for educators and school districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lesler. Before we go on, I just wanted to ask you a question, and I thought your questions were very appropriate. How do we get this far without asking the difficult questions at the start? Do you feel that if they had taken the time, as I said before, to listen to educators and delayed this for a year, it could have been done because the advice of the teachers would tell them how to do it without eliminating the talent of the teacher in what she can do, as the quote you gave, to manage those children? Do you think a year would have been okay?
I think it would have been more than a year, and it would have been a process, but you're absolutely right. You had to get people to buy into this process. They had to prepare for this process. I don't think anyone objects to high standards and certainly wanting to improve curriculum and instruction. But that is a process. There is no easy way out of that.
Okay, and one other thing, I understand that much of the materials that would become available, by the time they were made available, most school districts had run out of their budgets,
That's
right?
exactly
So they couldn't
right.
get them to assist the teachers, right?
That's exactly right.
So
And keep in mind that just providing the materials without the professional development and the training, there's got to be depth and breadth to educating. And we know that through research. When a teacher has depth and breadth of the content and the instruction, they are highly successful. That's a highly successful teacher. And the Department of Education is supposed to be the support staff
Yeah.
to make that happen. And they have not created. They are a test and punish center, and they're doing nothing more than that. So I agree with you.
So this was really too much too soon, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Karen, a couple questions.
Sure.
Can you hear me here? Now, I have a degree in education. I went to SUNY Plattsburgh, all right? Can you hear me? Okay. I went to SUNY Plattsburgh. What I was taught about tests, when I gave tests to kids, what it did was give me an avenue to make sure that I was teaching it appropriately, okay? And if not, I had to go back and reteach it. So it's my understanding that these tests that the kids were given, like 70% failed. Is that correct?
On the pretest.
On the
And then,
pretest.
certainly on the standardized test, absolutely.
And you were not given the test, you couldn't review the test, you
That's
couldn't
exact-
look at the test questions, okay?
Right.
They're asking you to learn from, don't worry, the kids are going to take a test. And, you know, I'm looking at, if I have a kid that has always been an AP student, and next thing I know, he or she fails a test, I'm not going to be able to say to that student, don't worry, we expected you to fail this
Right.
test.
That's exactly
Okay,
right.
that's going to crush them as far as moving forward throughout their academic career. Now, my understanding is,
And I just want to add to your comment, because you're right. Assessment, it must be done minimally. It is a tool for teachers and the student, and that's all it should be. And it has to be appropriate, and it could be a snapshot. It doesn't have to be at the magnitude that the state is implementing. And what is it they're going to do with this tool?
and the other thing that I'm seeing, and I want to see if this is right, it's sort of like they're writing lesson plans. So they're saying you're going to teach 5 minutes of this, you're going to teach 10 minutes of this, and you're going to teach, you know, they're going to get seat work for a little bit, then you're going to reinforce 5 minutes of this. So basically you have the teachers in the classroom, they're just reading scripts.
That's
Okay.
exactly right.
And there's no actual learning going on under this program. And when I went to school, and one of the things they stressed was children learn in different ways, okay? So, I mean, when you have tailored instruction like this, like some kids are textual, they have to touch, they have to see it. For instance, they have to write it down, okay? Some are visual, they have to see it. Other ones are, it's an auditory process that they have to hear it. So you'll have some people will learn by listening to tapes over and over again. That's how they get it. Other people will fill out index cards, all right? And you may have two of these where it's textual and visual, where you're going through the index cards. That's how you learn. Children learn in different ways. Doing it this way, they're knocking that out from what I see. And the other thing that I used to do is, in a classroom, you teach to the center of the class. What I'm saying is, I look at the kids in the middle of the class, I'll teach the lesson, I'll give them seat work to reinforce what I just taught them. Then what will happen is, if I have kids that are a little advanced, I might give them a little tougher work, not to punish them, but to keep them engaged, okay? Then what it does is it gives me an opportunity to get to the kids that did not get what I was teaching and teach them in a different way.
That's right.
And every lesson that you teach builds upon the next lesson and the next lesson. And they're building blocks. And if you leave out that block, you're never going to get to where you want. Now, there's the Common Core, the way they're asking you to teach it, is that giving you an opportunity to teach that way?
The way it's scripted and the way it's being shoved, and I mean shoved down teachers' throats, is still lined up to this standardized testing. And the moment you standardize testing and have high-stakes testing, you take away teachers' creativity to instruct. Teachers will assess a classroom and move their lessons according to the students in that room, and that will change from year to year, and you take that away. To have teachers be given a script on what they should say and how students respond is ludicrous. It makes no sense. All this demonstrates to educators that the SED is not in the classroom. There is a multitude of things that go on in that classroom. Emotional issues with students, relationship building, and then instructional learning. Nobody objects to raising the bar and having high standards, but all of that is the work of the educator. And the SED's responsibility is to provide the tools that teachers need to create this environment and learning in the classroom. And high-stakes testing does not create a learning environment.
Right.
It
And
never
that-
did, and you've got 30 years of data to prove it out.
And now that we have inclusive classrooms where we take children with special needs and we put them into the classroom, those are the kids we're going to lose here.
Absolutely.
Because
You
you're
can
not
a
gonna have
child
time.
Come through a school class system. I think that's one of the most critical, that's an important point that you're bringing up, is the fact that you can have a youngster in a self-contained room most of the elementary years, and then you want to push them into a mainstream class for social reasons, also to push them a little further academically. Now you've got this youngster in a room with a teacher that is got to perform. All students have to be successful, and that burden is on that youngster not to develop a love of learning and working with a teacher in a particular content area. You have destroyed any chance of that being successful under this testing. The
So-
moment you pre-test that youngster, you already have disengaged that student.
So in my opinion, we're going to lose all of these kids.
I think you've already lost students, and you heard that earlier testimony, and you're going to continue to disengage students in learning. And you're also going to lose highly effective teachers that don't want to teach like this, and they're going to leave this industry.
One last question. And I'm going to ask this of everyone, especially the teaching professionals. What they're giving you, is it developmentally appropriate?
No, not at all.
Okay, and you submitted here a math
I gave
problem.
you math problems. That's an 8th grade sheet, worksheet for 8th graders.
Yes, can you read this equation?
Oh, I don't have a copy of it,
Oh, here.
but you want me to read it out loud? It says, list all possible cases of whole numbers m and n for identity 1. More precisely, when m is greater than 0 and then n is greater than 0, we already know that 1 is correct. What are the other possible cases of m and n for which 1 is yet to be verified? I have a doctoral degree, and I don't even know what this is telling me. Okay? This is work, and I'll say this is work of mathematicians. So, but we're dealing with children, and that's the most critical thing. And you send a child home to do homework, and you give them 20 problems like this, and they are frustrated, and they're angry, and their parents are frustrated and angry. What happens to this? This goes into the garbage, and you disengage the child, and it can happen rapidly. It doesn't have to take years. It could happen in one session of learning, trying to learn math.
What happened to if Farmer Brown has 2 bushels of apples,
Right.
and he gives half
Thank
of his
you.
load to a friend? How many bushels does he have left?
That's exactly right.
Right?
That's exactly right. And that's, not to belabor this, but that's the whole point to this. You start a curriculum from the beginning and you build, especially with mathematics. That is a building process. So I understand where you want to go, but you don't enact it to 8th, 6th, and 5th graders and shove it down people's throat. It's a process, and we can get there if the process is that the SED is not the dictator. The SED is the support staff to teachers in that classroom.
Very good, thank you.
I
And you can keep your
Thank you.
I just want to point out before we continue, we've been joined by our colleague Andrew Garbarino, another representative of part of Suffolk County in the Assembly, and I believe Assemblyman Lupinacci has a question.
Just a quick question and a follow-up. Assemblyman Graff asked a great question. What grade level is this? Now, just to reiterate, is there flexibility in choosing the material? And you pointed this out, and it's dealing with exponents, the problems that you use. Is there flexibility in choice of material?
Certainly the commissioner speaks to there's flexibility, but we, as teachers, we don't know what's on the test, so we're trying to cover material and speculate what will be. Everything is secretive. Everything changes rapidly, so we're trying to get material. And then you have people's careers on the line if that test, those students don't perform. So you are moving a lot of material forward because you are teaching to the test.
And, the sample that you give here, and it obviously lists Common Core on it for 8th grade, I mean, the material isn't that dense, but the way they illustrate it, the way they give the examples,
that's
and
right.
then they, lose the question right in the wording,
That's right.
there needs to be more of a build-up approach, I think.
That's right.
And, looking at this lesson isn't that complex, but the way they're presenting it, it's making it terribly complex.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you could certainly look at ELA, and the same approach is that children are reading material that we're not teaching social studies anymore because we're concentrating on ELA. Meanwhile, in order to read the material, they've got to have this background and this knowledge.
I mean, I've been a math tutor for over 20 years, and I teach college-level statistics. And even I had to reread exercise 1, and it's not because I don't have the ability to do it, it's just that they're going to lose the 8th grader in the wording of it.
That's
so.
right. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No.
Dr. Gerald? I apologize. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Gerald.
Gerald.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you for hosting today's forum. We are very pleased that you've asked us to participate and to finally give some input on the Commissioner's implementation, a very rapid implementation of a poorly planned curriculum, assessment, and teacher evaluation process. So my name is Roberta Gerald, and I am the very, very proud superintendent of the Middle Country Schools. Middle Country is a district that is challenged financially to provide its students with a solid education. But with our community, we've been able to meet that challenge, and we've been able to provide our students with the resources they need to be successful once they leave us. But we are now challenged with mandates and requirements that don't make sense to us and that don't seem to have real value, at least at this moment, for our kids. Our community is losing confidence in the state education department, and that's evidenced by the very recent unprecedented opposition to high-stakes assessment on the elementary level. And I hope that that lack of support, that lack of confidence doesn't spill over to our schools, because on the local level, we don't deserve that. We work very, very hard to provide our students with what they need. And for the most part, my remarks will be centered around Middle Country, but I'm also the very proud president of the Suffolk County School Superintendents Association, and that association is made up of very capable educators who have spent their lives trying to buffer our districts from political initiatives and actions that do nothing to forward public education. And for the most part, we do a good job, but we are now stymied by a commissioner that's forgotten what it's like to teach. So my comments are going to be are created within a wider context than my district's parameters. My comments are created within an educator's framework, a framework that I am humbled and proud to hold. There's no argument in Middle Country, and there's no argument in any Suffolk County school district that standards ought to be high. There is no argument that we need to educate our students so that they are career and college ready. In fact, that's our work. And that's what we do very, very well here on Long Island. In Middle Country, for example, without the Commissioner's direction, we required our students to study mathematics in each of their 4 years of high school. Because we know if they leave high school with the habits of mathematical reasoning intact, they don't have to take remedial courses once they go to college. We knew that, and we decided that on our own. But how is our implementation of an initiative to raise standards and to improve student learning different from the Commissioner's initiatives? Well, the political motivation behind Race to the Top is very well known. And that was the rush to be amongst the first state to adopt a teacher evaluation system tied closely to high-stakes assessment. That's clear. Middle Country's initiatives were untainted by politics. They were driven by a desire to help kids learn. But let's move beyond that. Middle Country researched the curriculum we were considering for implementation. We talked about it, we discussed its value, we looked at national research. We listened, we heard, we slowed down when necessary. We developed resources, we trained teachers, we prepared students, we budgeted in advance. We made decisions about priorities, and we were intelligent and thoughtful in our implementation, and our students benefited. Now let's talk about the Commissioner. The Commissioner imposed. There was no listening, and there was no respectful collaboration. We as superintendents asked the Commissioner to slow down implementation, to move in each piece of his multi-phase initiative carefully. So we wanted to be prepared. We wanted to have the resources. We wanted our kids to be ready to learn. We wanted our teachers to be ready to teach. And by the way, had they slowed down, I think State Ed would have done a little better too, because they could not meet a number of their timelines. And every time they missed a timeline, we lost more confidence in their ability to lead us. So, but what did Middle Country do to implement the Commissioner's initiative? To implement the new assessments, the new curriculum, the new evaluation system? Well, the high-stakes testing piece, when we were forced to put it into place last year, cost us at the very start $300,000. In 2 months, it cost us $300,000. We needed that money to bring computers into our primary and elementary schools. We needed that money to pay for some of the assessments. It was money that we hadn't planned. Middle Country doesn't have the financial flexibility to fund one item without removing another item. So what did we do? We lost staff. We no longer, for example, have elementary librarians. We have 10 elementary schools, and we actually have 1 librarian moving around the 10 schools. Yeah. We lost valuable instructional time, and that's time that's an item that's much more expensive than anything. We lost that because not only did we have to administer the assessments, we had to remove teachers from the classroom so they could grade the assessments. And we lost our parents' confidence in the value of assessments to inform instruction. And we now have to take the time to teach them again to be confident in our schools. Middle Country, like districts across New York, knows its students, knows its community, and knows how to implement initiatives. We have the practical experience, and we have the wisdom to do it right. And so my primary recommendation for you and for the Commissioner is to stop and listen, to really collaborate with us, to slow down and let us get the work done, and to be respectful. One of the Commissioner's deputies mentioned at a recent forum that high-stakes testing has to be in place because without the testing, instruction would not occur. That comment speaks to SED's lack of trust and a lack of respect for our public educators. It's disgraceful. The Commissioner should reflect on what his actions have brought about, and he should work with us. We will forgive him. He can work with us in a collaborative partnership to authentically and respectfully phase in a process that benefits all of our learners. So I thank you again for this opportunity. It is a pleasure to be listened to.
Thank you. And it's certainly a pleasure for us to have you testifying today. And I think the point you closed on, ties back also to what my colleague Dave McDonough said earlier. Major changes need to be done with that type of collaboration in any field, whether it's healthcare, you want to consult with doctors, nurses. In education, you want to consult with administrators, teachers, and certainly us in the legislature feel that we had something to say on this issue before it was implemented, but like Dave said, we really weren't asked to be a part of it because, you know, so many of our constituents rely on us to be their voice in that, and we're hearing from our teachers on a day-to-day basis what's going on and how this is going to affect them. So you made a perfect point there on how we need to look at things like this, but looking forward that this is very much why we're here today, so that when we come together after we've done this series of hearings, that we can have heard from so many stakeholders like yourself who we know are doing an excellent job educating our students here on Long Island. So thank you for being here today. Assemblyman Graff?
Yeah. Do you have any idea how much implementation of this is going to cost your school district overall?
I'm really afraid to think about it because I know we have probably spent close to $1 million over the past 2 years. Because it's not just the technology, it's substitutes, it's training, it's textbooks, and it's time. And how do you value time?
Right.
We lose instructional time. We don't have that much time with our kids. It seems like we do, but we really don't. And we need to spend that time teaching them to trust us so that they can learn, and that's removed from us. So it's money, it's resources, and it's fear, too, of what the costs are going to be going forward. We were told, for example, that and we have it in writing, and the memo was then withdrawn by the State Education Department, that we needed to budget 5% of our annual budget to buy technology to be able to implement the park program, that's the assessments that are going to be in place within the next couple of years. Now, this is in a time when we have a tax levy cap, when we have costs going up, just the cost of living is going up. So how do we budget for that?
Right. And now we gave you the state gave you additional costs, lots of additional costs.
Additional costs.
How much additional funding did they give you to implement this?
Well, I can tell you, because we just looked at this, in Middle Country, because of the gap elimination adjustment formula, we've lost about $36 million in state aid over the past 3 years. Because the foundation formula hasn't been able to run, we've lost about $19 million. So we have exactly what you said. We have additional expenditures required and a lack of dollars to support them.
Okay, now you submitted teacher evaluations as the state asked you to do.
Yes, we did.
Do you have an idea how much that cost you?
Well, that's part of the dollars that I gave to you, but equally important was the amount of time to come up with a plan that I can say to you I don't believe in. And thank goodness I have Middle Country has a good teachers association who also realized we had to play the game. We didn't believe in the political motivation behind that plan, but we created a plan that met our needs to comply.
Okay. And the governor promised that he would reimburse you the amount of money for implementing the teacher evaluations. I was there, big fanfare about it's not going to cost the school districts a dime. Mm-hmm. Did you see any reimbursement?
No, I saw bills, though.
Okay. Lastly, it's my understanding that some of these computers for testing are that's what they're for, testing. They're not for the students to use. They're set aside for testing. Is that true?
Well, in Middle Country, we have a practice of using everything we have for multiple reasons. So probably it would be best to save the computers just for testing to make sure they work when testing comes about, but we use them for instruction also.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Gerald. This is just an example of what mandates are when you get to the educational level. I just want to share something that a group of retired teachers gave me a pie plate last year when I spoke to them, and maybe some of you have seen it. And it says, those that can teach, those that can't make laws about teaching.
I like that.
Chad?
Just a quick follow-up.
Sorry.
I know you said you were looking at $1 million it's cost you over several years. I just want to know, Middle Country, just so in terms of demographics, how large is the district and how much is your operating budget per year?
Middle Country, we have about 11,000 students. We have 14 schools. Our budget's about $220 million.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to give you an idea of where we are, we're going to go next to, from the Sayville School Board, Mr. John Verdone and Dr. Walter Shartner, the superintendent of Sayville. On deck are Nadia Resnikoff and Mr. Tony Felicio from the Middle Country and Connecticut Teachers Associations. But as our Sayville people are on their way up, I want to welcome our colleague Michael Fitzpatrick.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for having us here. I'm not going to read my testimony. You all have that. I'm taking for granted. I'd like to touch on, I'm Walter Shartner, Superintendent, Sayville Public Schools. Just a bit of background. This is my 41st year in education, 36th in Sayville, 26th in administration. So I've seen a few changes. I'd like to piggyback on a lot of the earlier testimony, and starting with the Common Core learning standards. From what I'm hearing from our teachers and from most of the teachers, as well as my wife, who's a teacher, going on Facebook to many of her sites, the Common Core might not be the devil. New York State modules and domains that script what teachers, very, very successful, highly effective teachers do, is the problem. Now, I know Mr. Graff has. I hope everybody else has a chance to go on to Engage New York and look on how scripted these modules are in terms of the first 2 minutes do this, the next 8 minutes do this. It's an insult to our teachers on Long Island, as well as through the whole state. I've been to enough Common Core workshops and heard how comprehensive, rigorous, and sequential they are. To me, that just reaffirms the fact that the way in which New York State Education Department is rolling these out is nothing more than educational malpractice. If you're going to build curricula, you're going to start from the bottom up with a foundation, just like you're building a house. It's not rocket science. If you don't have that foundation built, you're not going to build much of a house. What you're doing by throwing this K through 8 is you're immediately creating educational gaps in the learning of these students. And that's why you hear that they're not successful on these tests. They haven't been taught the material because the state education department has created gaps in their learning and forced our teachers to do what they know is not the right thing to do. And that's why you hear about the excess stress that these children are under. And the stress that the teachers, where you take these very poorly designed tests on material that the students don't know. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to evaluate teachers on this and affect their livelihood. New York State testing. This is the Pearson Fund. The worse our kids do, the wealthier Pearson gets. And then college and career ready. Well, the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, for a year before that first Common Core test, said you can expect about a third of the students to be proficient. And guess what? A third of the students were proficient. Gee, I wonder if that was an accident or that was the cut points that the commissioner picked. It's an arbitrary cut point. If you want to look at college and career proficient, look at our graduating seniors throughout Long Island that are going to the best universities that don't need 63% remediation in community college. We don't have 63% of the kids going to community college. Our students are very successful. Another example, which is in my testimony, has to do with the 8th grade at Sayville Middle School. Half of our 8th graders take the Algebra 1 Regents exam. Out of those 125 students, 125 passed, 12 didn't get 80 or better. Well, guess what? 80 or better is the state's measure for college and career proficient at the high school level. So in essence, 49% of our 8th grade students at Sayville Middle School going into high school already have met high school proficiency for college and career ready. But only 31% of them were proficient in 8th grade. What happened to the other 18% that are high school proficient but not 8th grade proficient? Maybe there's a little problem with their measures. The next stressor, which unfortunately I don't hear enough about, is the PARCC tests. They are supposed to be implemented in 2015, next year. Those are computerized tests, or you can do the non-computerized test. Oh, and by the way, I believe it was Roberta, or her board president, that mentioned the hours that these kids were being tested in ELA and Math Now. By the way, the PARCC tests are longer. We just heard that at ASCD from State Ed. Plus, they're given in 2 sittings. One in April, one in June. A lot to look forward to. And they're also supposed to be more expensive. I wonder who's picking up the tab on that. Which brings me to the next piece, which is cost. Sayville is about 3,400 students. About 1,438 took 3 through 8 testing. It costs us about $250,000 a year because we have to print the tests. The state just gives us a file. We have to implement the tests. We have to grade the tests, and of course we have to send them out because the teachers aren't trusted to grade their own tests. And then we have to enter that data into the state data system, which is another issue. I won't go there now. We have staff development for Common Core learning standards. Not even in that. Infrastructure for Park, not even in that. And by the way, I happened to be at the NISCUS Superintendent's Convention in September, and on Monday, September 23rd, Dr. King was the keynote speaker, and his statement was that New York State pays a lower percentage on state testing than most states. Well, guess what, Dr. King? The reason that is because you're putting the cost on the local school districts. And honestly, we can't afford it and keep the programs under a tax cap. APPR, high-stakes testing, do not improve instruction. And they are crazy expensive. I encourage you to have the state do a cost analysis on how much it costs throughout the state to implement these and see what effect it has on the education of students. I already know what effect it's going to have on the education of students. It's going to be negative effect. But do it yourselves. Get an independent group to do it. I strongly recommend that we slow down immediately on the implementation of the Common Core learning standards and go back to the way in which the last time we put new standards into the state, where it took 3 years, where we had the information, the teachers sat down, were able to develop curriculum, and then they thought about testing after the teachers had 2 years to implement that curriculum. Novel idea. Another common theme that's with us too is we need to end this one-size-fits-all for education. We have students that we should encourage to go to college and go on to professions from there. We have students that we should encourage to go into trades and take their appropriate licensing tests. Right now, unless these career and technical education students jump through the college and career ready hoops, they cannot get a diploma. They have a new certificate. But guess what's on the first thing on most applications? Do you have a high school diploma? Their answer will have to be no, unless they have a career and technical education diploma. Once again, and this is in my testimony, Sayville High School, which is a culmination of kindergarten to 12th grade, was rated by Newsweek to be in the top 1.8% of high schools in the country. We have Siemens award winners, semifinalists. We have Intel semifinalists. And on Long Island, we have more than most states. But yet, we all need to seem to follow the same rules. And personally, we weren't broke, so don't try to fix us.
Mr. Verdone, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll go to any questions for either of you.
Good evening. Closer. You got it now? Good evening, members of the panel. My name is John Verdone. I am president of the Sable Board of Education. I've been a board member since 2003. Sable has approximately 3,400 students enrolled in our schools. As the panel may know, 48 states and the District of Columbia have adopted the Common Core Learning Standards. My fellow trustees, as well as our superintendent, believes the Common Core Learning Standards have merit. Our community has and will continue to support and maintain and make strides to improve the performance of our students of Sable. Everyone in our community wants our children to be successful, our teachers, our administrators, our parents. I am proud of the accomplishments of the students of Sable. 70% of our students are attending four-year schools with over $4.1 million in scholarships. 97% of our students receive Regents Diploma. 45% receive Regents Diplomas with advanced designation. 25% received a Regents Diploma with advanced designation with honors. 49% of our 8th graders met the high school mathematic measures for college and career ready with an 80 or above on the high school algebra exam. 31% of those students met the 8th grade measure. As I was preparing this testimony today, a fellow colleague, a fellow Board of Ed trustee posted something on my Facebook page, and I would like to read it. Childhood is not a race to see how quickly a child can read, write, and count. Childhood is a small window of time to learn and develop at the pace which is right for each individual child. Our window with these children is short. We want our children to be successful, lifelong learners. There was no common sense implementation of the Common Core. The state and its lawmakers have rushed its implementation, and by doing so, you have broken the spirit of our children. You have broken the spirit. You have broken the spirit of our teachers. You have broken the spirit of our parents and our administrators. Our children who were once successful are no longer according to the exams. What do we tell these children? What do we tell these parents? What do we tell the teachers and the community? One can understand that why the test out movement is growing in numbers throughout the state, especially after Commissioner King has stated the exams were not true measures of our students or the ability of our teacher. One will have to ask what the purpose of the exams were. Maybe Pearson can answer that question. How can we label a third grader not college or career ready when they do not meet the level of the test makers? What are we doing to our children? Sable taxpayers have spent approximately $250,000 for scoring, testing, and printing. In addition to the state not taking full responsibility for these costs, the results do not measure anything worthwhile and detracted from the education of our children. As my superintendent earlier, as Dr. Sutton stated earlier, the state should really pick up the cost for these exams and the printing. Furthermore, the state and the federal government held our children for ransom. Unless the state agreed to adopt the Common Core standard, we would not have been eligible for racial top funding. Sable received approximately $16,000 spread over 4 years, 5 buildings. We have spent many, many times that just for its implementation. My fellow Sable board members and I, as well as board members throughout the state of New York, are elected officials much like yourself. Like you, we're not only accountable to our constituents, but to children and the taxpayers of the community. We know our community. We know what needs to be done. Local control will and continue to play a vital role. We want our children to be successful, much like you. The erosion of local control continues to be a major concern. We need to take a hard and truthful look at the future and what we need to ask ourselves, are we doing what's best for our children? We need to take a truthful look at the harmful impact this initiative is having on all shareholders. I will strongly advocate that school board members have a seat at the table during any discussions of reforms of Common Core. Let's slow down, let's take a breath. We owe it to the most important asset of our community, our children. We need a common sense approach to Common Core. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, and I think you both made an excellent point using your district as an example, because as all these things have been coming down the pike, Something that strikes me is we're trying to look at maybe some districts in this state that were underperforming, and we want to get them to where higher performing districts like yours are. And we want to do this and raise them up, not do this. And as you're saying right now with your district as an example, that's what we're in danger of doing here. We'll get them to have equal performance by dragging everybody down, and that is certainly not what we want for our children in this state. And I thank you for continuing to work with us and being here today, because it is helpful in order to do all these implementations. To me, one of the biggest things lacking is flexibility. If you're a district that's performing well, leave you alone. Sure, there's other districts that we may need to implement things in, but by and large, as we know, we have some very high-performing districts here on Long Island, and we should be giving more flexibility and really looking at what those districts are doing to make their students so successful, rather than hampering them with new regulations and things that are going to, unfortunately, drag down the performance that they've been so great with. So thank you guys for adding your voices. Assemblyman Graff?
Yeah. We've all talked about Common Core. We understand the philosophy behind it. The implementation of Common Core has just been idiotic and chaotic.
Worse than that, it's been harmful to kids.
Right. And one of the questions I have, what's the morale like as far as your students, your teachers?
My principals, my assistant superintendents, myself are constantly talking teachers off the ledge. The parents are uptight and nervous because their kids are uptight and nervous. They enter the building, and within the first couple weeks, they get hit with tests because we have to pre-test for the APPR. There's also a response to intervention, which actually is a good thing if implemented properly, which we already measure student growth within the confines of the district. So it's already being done. And back to Pearson, another thing I wanted to add with the tests, and certainly you could check into this, these tests are owned, and these questions are owned by Pearson. That's the reason we can't look at them. Pearson can sell these questions to any state. So they're basically being paid by New York State to create tests that they can sell and make more money on.
And we haven't gotten into the data collection on this either. You're also collecting data, from what I understand.
That's correct.
Okay. And there's a cost to that also, with the data collection?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. There was one other question I had. All right, and that's
I just want to add, I know we talked about the teachers' morale, the administrators' morale. What about the students? What about the students' morale? When they start kindergarten, you want to engage these as soon as the first steps in the door. What are we doing to our children? What are we doing to the classroom? What are we doing, really?
That was part of my question, John. I asked about student morale. But you know what I'm interested in? Has anybody looked at attendance rates for these kids? Has anybody looked and seen, have you had an uptick in absentee students being absent?
I really haven't looked, so I couldn't answer that. In our district, as much as parents are frustrated, they are very, very pro-education, and they're, unless there is a legitimate illness, they're not going to keep their kids home. I think it's more manifested in, you know, the child stating that they don't like school anymore. But, you know, I think they're at a point where, you know, they will attend. And certainly, I'm sure the mental health professional that was here earlier would be a better one to give you a sense of that type of an issue.
All right, if you can get back to me, I'd like to know if there was an uptick, just a little uptick, and I want to see if there's an uptick in the number of kids that are going to the nurse's office, especially during testing and stuff. All right, if you can get back to me, I appreciate it.
That avoidance behavior, I think, would probably be yes.
Okay, thanks.
Andrew Garbarino?
Good afternoon. I have a question. Sable High School graduate. How many days did the students spend taking tests this year? You know, maybe a third grader.
Which tests?
Well, it's all right. State mandated tests. How many days did they?
You have RTI
Yeah.
that's state mandated. You have APPR that's state mandated, both which have tests, and you have the 3 through 8 testing, which is mandated.
So total.
I would say basically in the middle school level, from the beginning of April until the middle of, beginning of April until almost the end of the school year, you might have 2 weeks that are normal. The rest is testing. Between going from the state tests to the SLO post-tests to the Regents exams and final exams. So, you know, it's constant testing. In high school, again, you have pre-testing, generally midterms is the middle, and that's not much different other than the fact the Common Core Regents is this year in the beginning of June, and you have algebra students taking 2 Regents exams. Well, the state said they only have to take the Common Core, but you can count the higher of the 2 grades if they take the other one. So, you know, they can say that we're only making you take one, but in reality, they're going to take both because they want to be successful. Elementary level, you have for K1 and 2 and 3, teachers have SLOs, so they have to do pre-test in both math and English. They have to do whatever test they use for Ames Web, not for RTI, which we use Ames Web. Then in mid-year, they'll take a benchmark assessment, either for APR and Ames Web. And then in April, they start the state testing. And basically the month of April is state testing. Then you have to grade those state tests. So those teachers, even though they can't grade their own, it's a consortium, so they have to go grade others. So they're gone for 2-3 days. Then they can start on the final Ames Web to measure student growth, as well as any APPR testing for their SLOs.
That's a lot of tests.
Yeah.
My concern with all those tests, I mean, I went to college and there was a lot of things would come up other than my studies, and so I spent a lot of time cramming for exams because there didn't seem to be enough time. So I would always do well, but it seemed like the retention, you know, for cramming for an exam was not there. I didn't retain a lot of the stuff that I studied. With all of these tests, is there a concern that the students are really just being taught to the test, take the test, and then being taught to the next test, and then there's no retention?
The students really are driven and want to do well. Yeah. And I think when they're given a test that they have absolutely no hope in doing well on, I would say 25% of our students didn't finish the ELA parts of the state test because they couldn't do it. They get trapped on questions, and they want to do well, and they want to get it right. Those tests were absolutely useless and just upsetting to kids. The Ames Web is a lot shorter. It's meant to take a snapshot of more or less the temperature of the student to see if they're progressing in growth. I think that should be our growth measure, honestly. I don't think the state should be giving us growth measures. We are very capable of doing that ourselves. And obviously the teachers, want to show what their children have learned, and part of their APPR is their livelihood. So there's pressure all over the place. Pressure that, yes, I'm sure there is some teaching to the test. I think the attraction to the modules and domains that the state has put out has shown that, and that's very unfortunate.
Well, I remember from being in Sayville Middle School and Sayville High School that many of the things that I have retained and learned, and a lot of the knowledge didn't come from the things I took on a test. They came from my experiences in the classroom. So I hope that we don't lose that in our students.
You probably remember the debate in 7th grade, Columbus, hero or villain.
I do. But I appreciate you coming here today and testifying. And one thing that I definitely want to follow up on, you mentioned how costly these tests are, but also you mentioned how, that we should follow up, the state should hire someone or to do a study of the effect of these tests on the students' education, because I do think they're possibly, with all these tests and all this pressure, there could be a negative impact, and I think that's something we should definitely, not just the cost, but definitely the effect on the students.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to go to now Ms. Nadia Resnikoff of the Middle Country Teachers Association. And if also Tony Felicio of the Connecticut Teachers Association could come up as well. Dr. James from Colmac, you're up next. I know you've been patiently waiting. As the next two speakers are coming up, just a reminder, we are kind of running about an hour behind now, but we want to make sure, the reason for that is because we don't want to cut anybody off. We want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to be heard. We want to make sure we have the opportunity to ask questions as to what the experiences of all the educators and parents that are testifying are. So again, we'll just ask your indulgence in doing your best to summarize what has been submitted in writing so that we can move on to questions and make sure we hear from as many people as humanly possible today. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nadia Resnikoff. I'm a 6th grade teacher in the Middle Country School District. I'm the president of the Middle Country Teachers Association, and I'm a member of the board of directors of NYSET. I'd like to thank the Long Island, New York State Assembly legislators for the opportunity to address you today regarding the Common Core Learning Standards. It's time for New York State to make urgent changes. For the sake of our students, we need to get it right. Parents across New York State are receiving their children's individual scores on the new, significantly more rigorous state tests administered last spring. Student scores have dropped dramatically, exactly as the state education department predicted, with 2/3 of failing to achieve a proficient score. Parents are understandably shocked and outraged to hear that their children's scores plunged, and they are justifiably anxious about broad brush statements that their children are not college and career ready from grade 4, 3 on. Similarly, school districts across the state recently completed new evaluations for teachers. Like parents, teachers are understandably shocked and outraged to see that these evaluations, incorporating flawed student test data, too often fail to reflect the reality of student progress and in many cases bear little relationship to their own effectiveness as dedicated professionals. This year's performance data is meaningless. It doesn't accurately measure student achievement or teacher effectiveness because, despite repeated warnings from teachers, parents, administrators, and superintendents to slow down and get it right, the State Education Department proceeded with the premature implementation of Common Core testing. The result, thousands of students were tested on material they had not yet had time to learn or was developmentally inappropriate for them. As was stated earlier, we have 8th graders who aced high school algebra regents exams they took, but performed poorly on the state's 8th grade math test. Clearly, the only thing these tests show is that the state is still not able to measure student and teacher performance accurately. These meaningless scores are based on bad data that in isolation are misleading and hurtful both for teachers and students. I believe New York State's interpretation of the Common Core is developmentally inappropriate. A first grade ELA module from SED said that reading and writing should be taught through the content of ancient Mesopotamia, as one of you mentioned. It would include how it was a river valley civilization, ziggurats, the Code of Hammurabi, and cuneiform, first grade. This is what is covered in 6th grade social studies and high school. Whatever happened to community, neighborhoods, towns, reading and writing through their own personal experiences so maybe they could relate to it? Students were exhibiting signs of severe stress on the day of the test. Many students put their heads down on their desks and they cried. Many were physically ill and weren't able to partake in the remainder of the school day. By failing to provide the time and capacity to implement the new learning standards in a quality way, New York State is endangering the very reforms intended to advance teacher development, student learning, and our shared mission of closing the achievement gap. New York State is falling short in providing resources to get it right. New York State's public education system is under tremendous stress caused by shortfalls in funding. Adequate resources for public education are essential if students are to achieve at higher levels. Yet, as classes began, school districts were burdened with less state aid than they received in 2009, and by the constraints of a restrictive and undemocratic tax cap. Despite the aid restorations contained in the 2 most recent state budgets, close to 3/4 of school districts are receiving less state aid than they were 5 years ago. The state's fast-forward timetable includes SED's expectation that future Common Core assessments will be computer-based, perhaps as early as 2015. While in many of our resource-strapped districts, as one teacher put it, the few out-of-date computers we do have are missing keys. Districts need the time and funding to introduce technology necessary to meet state requirements. Pearson, the publisher of these New York States, is a for-profit company that creates, owns, and charges for the resources that align with the Common Core learning standards. Who profits from our students' failing scores? If New York State is serious about raising achievement by all students, it must invest far more in public education. That includes funding for materials aligned with standards and the technology needed to support them, reasonable class sizes, additional instruction and support for students who need it, and funding for a rich, comprehensive education that goes beyond fill in the bubbles to produce thinking citizens. In order to implement the Common Core learning standards effectively, we need to put the brakes on to allow for them to be gradually phased into each grade level so that there are no gaps between the previous curriculum and the Common Core curriculum.
seems in theory, phase it in, that's interesting. I like that idea, phase it in.
We ask you to support teachers and parents in our call for best practice in measuring student achievement and for necessary transparency in the state's use of standardized tests. As you know, NICET supports bills that would require transparency, not only about the millions spent on standardized tests, but also about the frequency and duration of student testing, the loss of classroom instruction time, and the real impact on student learning. Well-designed standardized tests tied to high academic standards and aligned with classroom lessons should be only one of many tools used jointly to assess student progress, evaluate teachers, and inform instruction. No single test can accurately and fairly reflect all the many factors that go into teaching and learning. Teaching is as complex as the students we teach, and no single data point can account for all the educational and societal factors that influence what happens in our classrooms. Unfortunately, the state test scores released last month are of little help. Teachers are barred from seeing all the test questions or the acknowledged correct answers and using them to improve instruction. Districts are unable to use these results for meaningful professional development that would promote student success. We are calling for a 3-year moratorium on high-stakes consequences for students and teachers, including postponing the implementation of the Common Core Regions exams as a graduation requirement. SED plans to administer new exams this school year based on Common Core in Algebra 1 and English Language Arts, alongside the traditional gold standard Regions exams. SED also intends to begin using Common Core Regions exams as a graduation requirement for students who start 9th grade next year. Implementation of these exams should be delayed for 3 years to forestall a drop in Regions scores and graduation rates similar to the recent plunge in grades 3 through 8 test scores. If high schools were to parallel what happened in elementary and middle schools this year, it could mean that only 1/3 of our students would graduate high school. It's time to listen to the common sense voices of parents and teachers. We've been told we should accept this bumpy ride because the rush to implement requires building a plane in midair. This is a formula for a mid-air disaster. We've been told that these major changes must be done in a hurry because at some point you need to throw children in the deep end to see if they can swim. As teachers who work our hearts out every day on behalf of the children in our care, that's not acceptable. It's time to pull our children out of the deep end and devote the time and resources they need to achieve the higher standards. Getting it right means respecting the voices of educators and parents. We ask you to support us together with parents as we continue to fight for the future of public education. We ask you to get it right. We ask you to ensure that the Common Core learning standards are developmentally appropriate for students. We ask you to provide in full the resources districts need to ensure all students have an equal opportunity to master the new Common Core learning standards. We ask you for sufficient time to gradually implement the Common Core learning standards. These standards should be developmentally appropriate. We ask you to gradually phase in the Common Core learning standards. We ask you for a 3-year moratorium on high-stakes consequences for students and teachers. We ask you to postpone the implementation of the Common Core Regions exams as a graduation requirement. We ask you to support teachers and our parents in our call for best practices in measuring student achievement and for the necessary transparency in the state's use of standardized tests. We ask you to ensure that the Common Core learning standards and standardized tests are not about big business, but about kids and improving public education. And finally, we ask you to respect and listen to the voices of educators and parents. Thank you.
Mr. Felicio?
I'd like to thank you for having this hearing today. My name is Tony Felicio, Jr. I've been a special education high school teacher for 32 years. I'm also the president of the Connecticut Teachers Association. I'm going to start from here, and I will not be reading testimony, but I do want to make some comments, give you some questions to think about, and some concerns. I ask where this all come from. Simple answer, just follow the money trail. You'll know where it came from. Why did it come about? Well, all I've been hearing is about how America's not competitive in the global economy. Our kids are not college and career ready. Well, it's ironic that the state ed department who's saying these things and our national government were the ones about 15 years ago who actually lowered the standards for kids to get into colleges and whatnot by showing how they raise standards by lowering the rigor of our state regents exams. When children can get 15 questions right on the Part 1 algebra regions, okay, and not have to do another question on the exam and get regents credit, okay, there's something wrong with that. That's not raising standards. That's just making the cut score way, way down. So that's one issue. I watched the Education Nation the other day, a little bit of it, but I was honestly getting a little sick and tired of Exxon's commercials about how America ranks 17th in science and 25th in math. That is absolutely untrue, and there is no empirical data to support that. This, in a nutshell, is a social experiment without any research nor empirical data, where our kids, our students, our children are at risk. I would like to just point out a few facts to some of the myths. There's a claim that U.S. education ranks behind other countries based on international tests. The fact, none of the international tests used represent the overall quality of schooling, nor can they predict or explain the relationship to economic strength. According to the test makers' own explanations, they should not be used for this purpose. Fact, when U.S. schools are compared apples to apples, we are #1 in the world. Schools in the U.S., when measured with less than 10% poverty, like Finland, Germany, Denmark, and Switzerland, we are #1 in the world. Fact, there is no empirical data supporting the need to change to a Common Core. Fact, there are more Nobel laureates coming out of the U.S. than anywhere else in the world. Fact, there are 121,026 patents coming out of the United States. The rest of the world combined is 132,000. Japan, who we hear so much about in their educational system, has only 50,000 new patents. Fact, public school systems in the U.S. are #2 in the world on their return on investment in public education. Claim that the Common Core is internationally benchmarked. I challenge you, your staff, whoever else is in the powers that be, to find the research that supports that data. Only 4 cited pieces could be considered empirical studies related directly to the national standards and student achievement. No specific identification of countries that specific Common Core state standards are benchmarked from. Claim needed for student mobility. Fact, there are 50 million students in the public schools across the U.S., and their assertion that they need this so that one state to the next can have the same standards. According to the 2010 census, only 80,000 students moved between the states. That's a drop in the ocean. According to Diane Ravitch, who wrote recently Reign of Error, I recommend it be read by everyone on both sides. 1, our schools are not failing. 2, our test scores are higher than ever. 3, genuine progress has been made in narrowing achievement gaps. High school dropout rates are at an all-time low. Poverty is not an excuse for ineffective teaching. Poverty is highly correlated to low achievement. Test scores are not the best way to determine teacher effectiveness. When we talk about poverty, I wish our government, both at the national and state level, would spend as much time and money in trying to solve the social issues of poverty that lead to the low grades and difficulty for our students in our schools. When you ask a child to go to school and learn who's hungry, or goes to school, or goes to bed at night cold, or lives in a drug-infested community, or comes from an abusive household, it doesn't matter what you call it, Common Core, No Child Left Behind, whatever you want to call it, a child is not going to learn. And again, I'll say, follow the money. Some teacher concerns. We all know if we're going to go ahead with Common Core, which I still question if it's even necessary, is the state going to be ready to supply the school districts with the proper funding to do professional development? In a time, as some have mentioned already, with a 2% tax cap, you're asking us to do more with less. In addition to that, starting a new program. It just doesn't make any sense. So again, I would ask, does the Assembly, does the Senate, does the state have a plan as how we're going to finance that to do it correctly? Developmentally inappropriate for children, as you've heard. I'm not going to keep stating that. You've heard that enough. Timelines, completely unrealistic. Tasks cannot be implemented because teachers do not have materials. Again, it costs money. Where are the districts supposed to get it from? If the local taxpayer can't pay for it, is the state going to be willing to fund these types of things? You know, we hear so often that school districts should be run like businesses, and that bothers me, because the funny thing about school districts is the following. You hear that from people who want it to be run like a business. For example, a new program, Common Core. A company like Microsoft or Disney or Apple or any other successful corporations invest their money into training their people. We just take the Common Core, we throw it out, and wherever it lands, and no money is being supplied to make sure our teachers get professional development. That should be a #1 priority of our state government and our state education department, to train our people appropriately. There's a major concern that the powers that be, our politicians, okay, are less interested in improving student learning and more interested in political gamesmanship. Who can we blame? It's a punitive testing system. Tests are dictating the curriculum rather than the curriculum dictating the test. And another major concern that I know no one has really given much thought to. What are we going to do with our special needs population? Will there be additional funding? Has anyone thought of the fact that our special ed students are not going to be, under these circumstances, going to be graduating on time? That because they're legally able to stay in school to 21, that's an additional cost, because many of them will be there until they're 20, 21, that's an additional cost to the districts. Again, who's thinking about how that's going to be funded and be taken care of? And to the question of how much teacher input was actually put into the Common Core, honestly, I don't know of anybody that was asked. So I mean, but that could have happened in other places. But nonetheless, this is directly from my assistant superintendent as of 2 o'clock this afternoon. There has been absolutely no input from teachers into the New York State curriculum because the state ed department wanted to rush this through, get this thing going, okay, and ended up hiring outside corporations and companies to write the curriculums that we are then supposed to teach in outside our classrooms. So there has been no teacher input in regards to the actual curriculum being written and being used in the classrooms. So I finish with the following. State test data, terribly misleading. Parents who make the decision last year to opt out of the exam, I think, made a very good decision. You're looking at 9 hours of testing to get results that don't tell us anything more about our kids than tests that could have taken 45 or 50 minutes. That was from the superintendent of Sherwin-Wading River School District. Another, unless teachers write the tests, they won't improve anything. Diane Ravage, September 27, 2013. Common Core in jeopardy as more states withdraw. So I ask that as our representatives, you research yourself, or have your staff research some of this information. Just one more comment. You know, we've been talking about this. Teachers have been bringing up these issues for a number of years now, and I expressed this at a school board meeting the other night. It seems like when teachers, the professionals, those who work in the trenches, discuss with our politicians about what we foresee as problems that are going to occur, there's always this mindset that there's an agenda, that it's political. It's just teachers griping, complaining about something. It's about time that our politicians start listening to the professionals who work in the trenches, just as you would listen to firemen who fight fires, policemen who fight crime, and doctors who do medicine.
I thought he was going to say fight medicine.
Again, thank you for listening, and I hope you take this message from everyone who's speaking today back to Albany, because contrary to what Governor Cuomo says, we are the children's best advocates.
Okay, thank you. You brought up a couple points that I've been pushing. But I'm going to steal a line from, I'm sure that Superintendent Joe Rella is in the audience here someplace. Joe? And Joe's favorite thing is stop it, fix it, or scrap it. And one of the things, when you brought up, you know, and to be honest with you, the more that I read the Common Core curriculum and having that knowledge, you know, where I do have my degree in education, I shake my head. And, you know, the examples you gave about Mesopotamia, right, were one, and I'm looking at just before we started here, there were 3 of us actually with doctorates trying to figure out, first grade curriculum, how to pronounce this person's name. And I think we settled on hat, sheep, suit. Does anybody here know who hat, sheep, suit is? Raise your hand. Good, that's great. Well, they're asking first graders, okay, to identify her as a pharaoh of ancient Egypt and explain her significance as a pharaoh.
Where's it written down? I know who that is.
First grade. 3 of us with doctorates couldn't figure out how to say this person's name. Okay? Further, if you look at more of this curriculum, it's identify Aztec capital as, Doug, you over there? Say this again. Tenochtitlan can anybody here spell that? And then also identify that Machu Picchu is an Incan city. First grade, these are 6-year-olds. So, well, when you say, you know, to just put off the testing, right, this is inappropriate, okay? I don't know who wrote this. They were never in a classroom. They never taught, right? They have no idea. They've never taken courses in child development. And that's why, you know, I do have legislation in to basically withdraw from Common Core and Race to the Top. And we will not be the first state to do that, including Florida just a couple weeks ago. So, you know, I agree with you, right? We're trying to get this testimony, and basically all I'm going to say to you is keep speaking. Keep making your voice heard. And hopefully, you know, what we're trying to do here today is to send a message throughout the state that this is a problem. All right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. As our next speaker comes up, I want to just note we've been joined by our colleague Andrew Rella, 12th Assembly District. Mr. Donald James from the Comac School District, and Dana Friedman, if you're hanging tight there, you're next.
Show up?
No, just, I mean, a lot of people just signed up to be here.
They're not here yet?
Don, why don't you go ahead? Thank you.
There's been a lot already said here tonight. The vast majority of which I agree with. The vast majority of which I agree with. So let me start by telling a couple of stories, because I think in an effort to try to bring some of this home, it's important for us to recognize the effect that this is having on our children and our teachers. And the questions that were posed in the letter that was sent to us was the effects on students, the effects on staff, implementation issues, and then what should we do? Because it's easy, given the way they've handled this, for us to tell them what's wrong. How then we should roll things out differently may be another question. So I'm going to start by telling you that I'm the superintendent of Comac Schools. Have been, this is my 4th year. I also live in Comac. 2 of my children graduated from Comac High School. I also have a 4-year-old who is in pre-K this year. For those of you have heard me tell this story before, I apologize. She starts pre-K this year, and she was adopted. We adopted her a little over 2 years ago. And we have a lottery system in Comac for our pre-K. And as a superintendent, I decided it probably was best for me to not put her in the lottery system. So I put her in another pre-K program. And she goes to school, and this is a kid who loves life, who is happy, articulate, bright, sunny, and fun. She went to preschool last year and loved it. Loved everything about it. Started coming home within the first couple of days of school in pre-K and said, I don't want to go back to school. I don't want to go there anymore. Well, she's 4. And 4-year-olds love to go to school. It's been my experience anyway. And my other children loved going to school when they went through the system. And very successfully, I might add, through the Comac system under the old structure. Off to college, off to graduate school, doing really great things. And I said to my wife, you know, we really need to go find out what's happening in the classroom and why she doesn't want to go back to school. You know, I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but let's find out. So we go to open house, and then we have a conversation, and the teacher says, well, Common Core is here. And the school is concerned about the assessments and the effect that it's going to have on kids. So they're pushing it down into pre-K. So they're implementing Common Core, not only the Common Core standards, which is one thing to have standards, but the curriculum, which is what's taught, and then thinking about how they're going to assess them already in pre-K. She's no longer in that pre-K program. We removed her. I will tell you frankly, I don't blame the teacher, nor do I blame the school. Certainly it's the system and the structures that are in place that are putting this kind of pressure on them to put in place programs that aren't appropriate, in particular for 4-year-olds. I'll tell you another story real quick about a teacher. They continuously say, well, we involve teachers in the development process of these assessments and the curriculum. I got an email from a teacher. After I completed my student teaching in your district, I went on to make state tests for 5 years while teaching 3rd grade in another Long Island school district. I worked on the PARCC tests. In March, I was notified that 70% of the students would fail the test that I helped create, long before the cut score was even established. I quit NYSED, Pearson, and PARCC. So this is a person that they included in the process. And then one day, you asked how it affects teachers in another way. A foreign language individual had a conversation with me, and she said, you know, we offer this authentic assessment component in our classes. Now, 2 of my children have graduated from the high school, went through the foreign language program, and I can tell you in all sincerity, they make fun of me at dinner because they sit there and speak to each other in Italian, and I don't understand anything that they say. And they went through a program that was rich in authentic assessment. So the teacher says to me, you know, with all of the new assessments under APPR and everything else that's going on with the Common Core, we're really worried about continuing this authentic assessment component because we maybe should put in a paper pencil test. Folks, that's a travesty. That is not something that should be occurring in our classrooms. We should not be removing authentic assessment for paper pencil tests. And they don't want to do that, but they feel forced to do that. So I tell you these stories because the Common Core, and in particular the Common Core assessments, are having a significant impact on our students and our teachers. You've heard a lot about it here today regarding the stress associated with that. That doesn't go unnoticed by us. Anybody who is paying attention knows that this is creating undue stress. I heard somebody from SED blame teachers for that. And I will tell you that under no condition do I think it has anything to do with teachers. We have teachers doing everything they can to minimize the stress for children, and the children feel it when they come in to take the tests. So all of this educational reform conversation has been focused on teachers and how if we just structure what they do, students will perform at a higher level. I'm here to tell you, and I have a degree from New York University, and my study was in how schools learn, and in essence, how do we engage teachers and staff in conversations that improve student achievement? Nowhere does it say we should give more standardized tests. So the standardized test component is really significant. I will tell you, I believe there's another agenda. I'm not going to get into all the conspiracy theories, but I will tell you, I have spent time as a teacher in Philadelphia, in inner city Philadelphia. I spent time as a teacher in inner city New York. I've spent the last decade or more as a superintendent, both as a community superintendent on Staten Island, out east, and then in Comac for the last 4 years. I have pretty much unique perspective over what it is that is happening sort of in the back rooms and the conversations that are occurring regarding what people think is appropriate in different venues. What I'm here to tell you is it's not appropriate in any venue. It is not appropriate in low-performing schools, let alone high-performing schools. It is not appropriate. The research is clear. Engaging teachers in conversations about what it is that they want students to know, be able to do, and truly understand, and then identifying how you're going to know that locally. That is the work at hand. Over time, if there are state audits of what we do in schools, it can be really significantly further apart than every year. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some data. I'm going to really summarize my comments. I could go on. For those of you who have listened to me before, I could probably speak to you for about an hour and a half on this and just touch it. I'll try to do my best to finish it up in the next 5 minutes. Common Core. It was intended to give some structure to a national conversation about what's known in schools throughout the country. It is ill-conceived. It is not appropriate to think that students in Comac should be at the same place at the same time around what they're learning as students in another district, in another state, or with significantly different needs. It is inappropriate. Same thing would be true if we look at the island as a whole. So the Common Core itself, although the conception was to give some structure to that conversation, what happened was it resulted in a whole lot of other implications for us. Some of it had to do with the loss of local control. Teachers no longer have a say in what they teach, when they teach it, no matter the needs of their children, no matter the local resources. And that is a big issue for us. The overemphasis on high-stakes tests. In grades 6, 7, and 8, our kids will sit for 83 mandated tests for over 104 hours. I have a document here that was put together by my staff. It is 7 pages single-spaced of the assessments that are administered grade 3s to 8s as a result of APPR and the state tests. It is absolutely ludicrous. And others have said it here tonight, teaching is the goal at hand here, and learning. Testing is not teaching. And in fact, it detracts from that. So as we move forward, what do we do? How do we have that conversation with teachers? There is absolutely protocol in place that districts use all the time. I refer to it as top-down support for bottom-up reform. So teachers and administrators engage in conversations about good practice, what's working in our classrooms, what do we want students to know, be able to do, what do we want them to understand, and how will we know that? And there are things in place. We have our own database that we work on, which indicates these are the benchmark assessments that we use, that we value, that show student growth. The data is irrefutable. Students who graduate from COMAC go to college, almost 100%, and that includes students with IEPs. So they are getting at what's necessary, and we can point to any number of districts on Long Island that do exactly the same thing. Struggling schools who may need additional resources or have social issues that they're grappling with don't need additional state tests to help them support student growth and learning. So the conversation around should we keep the Common Core? If there are components of the Common Core that are valuable to a school district, that are appropriate to what it is that's been identified for them to do, sure. There are components that are absolutely inappropriate. Some of them are too difficult. You point to them, we can pull out probably 100 examples. Some of them are too easy in a lot of districts, and our teachers are abandoning them. So we're put in a position where now we don't know, based on the high-stakes tests, what they'll test. The purpose of testing is for us to get an idea of what students know, do an item analysis, and then try to adjust what it is that we're doing internally as a result. That's not happening because they won't give us the information. So we're really at risk then, because we're trying to cover this very broad curriculum, of altering our program. So we're altering our program in ways that we're not comfortable with, that we don't value, and that exclude some other very important content areas. So as we look at social emotional, as we look at physical education, as we look at the arts, they are at risk of being abandoned because we're trying to focus on the assessments. No one wants to focus on the assessments, but it becomes part of the APPR score. Now, the state has said, well, the APPR score doesn't count. It doesn't count this year, don't worry about it. Only we're getting calls now asking for the teacher's APPR score. And parents are wondering, well, is that teacher a good teacher because the kids didn't do well on a state test? And we've done our best to get the word out, and our parents have been terrific in COMAC because they know whether or not the student got a 2 in 4th grade does not mean that they're not going to go to college. They understand that. However, there are others who are saying, but wait a second, somebody is saying these state tests are good. I'm here to tell you they are ill-conceived, they are developmentally inappropriate, and they strip us of valuable instructional time and resources. So, the risks are significant. And by that, what I mean is, aside from the fact that we are stripping out just to support the mandated AIS services that increased this year as a result of these assessments. Somebody asked about cost earlier. We have hired $300,000 worth of teachers to give AIS to kids we don't think need AIS because of these tests. I mean, that's a small snapshot, but it's $300,000 for support services where we could be using that in other ways, like the arts, like enrichment programs, like gifted programs, like special services for students who are in need of special services, not a group of kids who we have identified as not needing AIS, academic intervention services. Yet we're mandated to provide those services for students. The research is clear, and I'm skipping through these pages as fast as I can. We stand at the precipice of doing significant damage to our schools. There is no doubt that we stand at the precipice. The unfettered implementation of narrowly developed and focused standardized assessments that do not support the mission of providing a well-rounded educational program for our students is ill-conceived. It's not going to work. The idea that we're not including teachers in this conversation is, in my opinion, an atrocity, and I'm not pandering to the audience. Make no mistake, teachers need to be involved in this conversation at a deep level, at the local level. It doesn't have to happen at the state level, where they bring in 100 teachers and say, well, we know what's right to do with the rest of the state. Those that don't agree, you can quit. The rest of us will figure this out and then superimpose it on everybody else. I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I can entertain them at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. James. Before we go to questions, I just want to acknowledge our colleague, Assemblyman Joseph Saladino, has joined us as well. Al? Anything? Andrew? Okay.
Good afternoon or good evening. I'm Dr. Donna Friedman. I am the founder and president of the Early Years Institute, a regional nonprofit organization created by 5 foundations here on Long Island and committed to improving school readiness, particularly for our most vulnerable children. We accomplish this by serving as a catalyst for community partnerships to assure all children are ready for school success. We do this work because we believe that success in school is determined largely by the experiences children have before they even get to school. We know that if children start behind, they often stay behind. A compelling body of longitudinal research has shown that investments in quality early childhood programs can yield substantial savings for schools and society. What's most important to recognize is that the benefits accrue only when the programs are high quality. This quest for quality in pre-K shapes my remarks today about the Common Core and testing. I will conclude with a proposal for a different kind of assessment that New York should consider because it leads to community action. The New York State Board of Regents created the New York State Pre-Kindergarten Foundation for the Common Core to serve as a resource for guiding the design, selection, and implementation of high-quality curriculum and instructional activities. Most importantly, it was intended as a bridge between the learning expectations of the children birth through 3 and the standards for those attending K through 12 public schools. What Pre-K for the Common Core is not is a checklist, an assessment tool, or a curriculum. It was never intended to stifle the creativity of teachers, caregivers, or parents. Unfortunately, because of the way that it's been implemented, it is doing just that. The guiding principles for the Pre-K Foundation for the Common Core stress the importance of applying standards to developmentally appropriate practice. This means that young children must be viewed as active learners who learn best through purposeful, child-directed play. Unfortunately, too many teachers currently teaching in pre-K classes and nearly all of the principals who are their pedagogical leaders do not know about what developmentally appropriate practice is for 4-year-olds and have little or no training or experience working with 4-year-olds. Even teachers with a 0 to 2nd grade certification may be exposed to only one early childhood course during their training and are very unlikely to have experienced student teaching in a preschool setting. One cannot simply take strategy used in the upper grades and use them with preschoolers. It simply doesn't work. Without exposure to child development theory and best practice, it's very difficult for teachers and administrators to take Common Core concepts and apply them to a curriculum and classroom management strategies. Therefore, my plea to this esteemed panel is that we find the resources to offer school districts more professional development, coaching, technical assistance to select and implement curricula that supports the Pre-K Foundation for the Common Core and developmentally appropriate practice. The Early Years Institute has developed a coaching model and a series of learning communities for pre-K administrators and teachers that can serve as a model. With regard to the testing, while the Common Core is, I believe, an important step in the right direction, the testing that accompanies it, that's supposed to hold teachers accountable, is completely misguided and doing more harm than good. I recently saw a poster at a parent rally that read, "Young children should be blowing bubbles, not filling them in." When talking about our youngest students the youngest children, 4 years old in pre-K, testing is more inappropriate than it is for older children. You don't have the same kid at 9 a.m. that you have at 11 a.m. They're very different children. They're not supposed to sit still for more than 15 minutes. They can't. And we've got some tests going on that have an hour with 4-year-olds sitting there. More importantly, a lot of districts are using several measures to test pre-K children, largely because there's no one instrument that measures the whole child. One of the ugly truths about testing is that we test what we can measure, yet what we can measure isn't what's most important. For instance, child-teacher interactions are the most predictive of child outcomes. It's just a huge body of research just came out in the last couple of months. But virtually none of the most widely used tests or observations measure this. We've just held a series of learning communities with about 10 pre-K administrators and principals and learned that they're using the same observations in high school that they're using in pre-K. This is a completely different child, the way they learn, the way they behave, and the kind of activities that should go on in those classrooms. It's also critical that tests align with what is being taught in the curriculum, and both the tests and the curricula should align with professional development. This is not happening at all. A recent study in Connecticut found that from both within the grade, within a pre-K or a kindergarten or a first grade, and then across the grades, there was no attempt to make sure that the tests are used that was measured in the curriculum and to guide classroom practice and teacher training. This is so critical because research shows that alignment from pre-K through third yields stronger child outcomes. And yet we are doing one thing in pre-K as if it's totally unconnected to kindergarten, et cetera, and that needs to change. In closing, I want to mention another kind of assessment for young children that we believe is more illuminating and has more impact than other assessments currently in use. I'm talking about a population-based measure called the Early Development Instrument, EDI, that was developed in Canada and is being used across the globe and is now in 60 communities across the United States. It covers the whole child and the key domains in the Common Core. It's easy for kindergarten teachers to complete, about 10 to 15 minutes per child in an online survey, and we are very comfortable relying on teacher observations for how children are doing. Most unique is the fact that the data are reported back by neighborhood, which helps the community focus on specific areas of need in specific neighborhoods. The Early Years Institute conducted the EDI in Westbury in 2010 and 2012 as one of the first 14 pilot sites in the nation, organized by UCLA and United Way Worldwide. 7 neighborhoods in Westbury were geo-mapped with EDI data showing where children are most vulnerable. We learned that 57% of the children in kindergarten in Westbury do not have the requisite skills for kindergarten in the area of communications and general knowledge. 54% were vulnerable in the area of small and gross motor skills, and 28% of the children had attention and impulse control problems. After seeing the data, over 70 organizations, parents, businesses, and elected officials came together in Westbury and implemented more than 25 interventions over the last 3 years to improve school readiness. The Early Years Institute believes the EDI would be a useful kindergarten readiness tool in other districts. We've approached a number of you here on the panel today to explore the possibility of exporting the expansion of EDI in order to prepare more children for school success. It's very clear that schools cannot address all of the problems that children are bringing to school, and it will be through school community partnerships that will truly reform education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fredman. It's good to have you here and add your voice. Having met with you, I don't know if any of my other colleagues have had the opportunity to learn about the great work you're doing in early childhood education, but keep up the good work. You as well, Superintendent, and thank you guys for lending your voice. We are going to go to Mr. Sal Nicosia, Ms. Vanessa Espinal up next.
Good evening. My name is Sal Nicosia. I'm a resident of Sachem School District for 56 years. I was a teacher in Patchogue in 1956. I taught Social Studies 7 at the time, called Explore New York, and it had to do with local government and so on. And I'm here to represent the Sachem School Classroom Teachers Association because he couldn't be here. You already received the resolution, so I won't read it to you. I'm sure you've been educated by good teachers to read what the contents are. But I want to make a couple of terse remarks because I have to leave very quickly. Number one, when I was teaching social studies, one of the things that fascinated me was I was teaching local government. Even though I had been raised and born in Brooklyn, I had never taken a course in local government at City College. But I did have an experience with a political science teacher who asked me to interview a committeeman. And through that experience, I became a committeeman and learned the political process from the grassroots. We don't have that right now in education, but that's another issue that will come up later on when you start to explore how we teach our young people to be good citizens and active in the political process. While I was teaching in social studies, I wrote a letter to Perry Duryea, who was then the Assembly Speaker. I happen to know all of you by name, not just by the fact that you're here. But seriously, one of the things that fascinated me when I was teaching and wrote to Perry Duryea, I asked him a question so I could share it with the students. What was the amount of local aid and state aid that we received for educating our children in 1957 when I wrote the letter? He came back with a very nice letter, they usually do. I was so happy you're teaching and all that. And he said that 66% of the aid was from the state and 34% from the local government. As I stand or sit here before you, having listened to these eloquent people present you good arguments about Common Core, I said to myself, what are we doing now? New York State sends 34% to Sachem and to other districts like us, and we pay locally 66%, which means we must be doing a heck of a good job with less money. So that money, we heard someone say money drives the issue. But seriously, teaching today is on the cusp of being questioned in everything they do, but nobody ever asks the question how good a job they do because they don't get a chance to practice like doctors do and lawyers. Lawyers practice. When you get in the classroom, it's all eclectic. When you're working with a client as a teacher or you're in command and you call the shot, but you try to teach 28, 29 students at a time when you're being observed and you can't predict how any one of those 29 is going to behave and affect your teaching, you can build up a lot of agita or stress. So consequently, I just want you to be aware that out there are thousands of good teachers doing their job every day. I was one for 50 years. I'm still educating people now in a different way. I'm teaching teachers to become more active in the political process. So tonight, you've heard the people act. Thank you.
I guess we don't have any questions.
Thank you, sir. Vanessa Espinal.
Good, thank you.
And after Ms. Espinal is going to be Ms. Donna Noesi. And I thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm a little nervous.
Don't be, please.
Don't bite. I know. Okay. Good evening. I actually wanted to begin by thanking you for hosting this forum and giving us the opportunity to have our voices and concerns heard in reference to Common Core and high stakes testing. I'm the parent of a 5th grade student in special education. I also have a 4-year-old that just started UPA. So I'm keeping a close eye on her. But right now I'm here to represent my 5th grade student, my child, my 5th grader. My daughter has always been a happy child. She loved going to school, she loved reading and struggled with math. And although she struggled, she tried. I'm sorry. In the 3rd grade, we began to notice some significant changes in her behavior. Anxiety, nervousness, she didn't want to sleep, she wasn't eating, and we didn't understand why, my husband and myself. So we started inquiring. We asked her teachers, we asked anyone around her what was going on. We even asked her. And we learned that there was a new curriculum that was thrown at our kids, implemented without any or minimal input or discussion with the community. While we know we have had New York State learning standards since 1996, Common Core learning standards were more rigorous, or are more rigorous, than previous standards in math and ELA. The SED and school districts are not establishing the needed avenue of support to implement these Common Core learning standards, nor are they engaging parents and the community. My husband and I have been educating ourselves the last 2 years on the Common Core and how it has affected and will continue to affect our daughter. We feel that in the last year or two, we have learned enough about it, where we, as her parents, will decide what we think is best for her, not anyone else. So after a rocky third grade, where she took the assessments and obviously did not do well on them, we go into the fourth grade prepared to have her refuse the assessments. Last year, we refused, she refused. And she was forced to sit through almost 3 hours looking up at a ceiling because she had extended time in her IEP. We feel that the tests are unfair to any child, but even worse for a child in special education that is already working and learning 2 grades below where she should be. Why do we set our kids up to fail? Why set her up to fail? Why give her something we know she will not do well on and then use it to assess our teachers? Why ask her to take tests that do not play any role in helping her learn? She has an IEP and we have goals set for her. These tests do not help her toward reaching her goals. Why ask her to take tests that will discourage her from wanting to take tests, to learn? We understand that testing is necessary, but give them tests that will have purpose and are used towards the student grades. Why ask her to take tests that are unfair to students and again are used to unfairly assess our teachers? Under Common Core, you call for differentiated instruction. Why then not differentiated testing? All kids are not the same. We know this. We shouldn't try to assess them on the same level. One size does not fit all. All this will do, or all this can do, is deter teachers from becoming special education teachers and doing yet another disservice to our special education kids. How about instructional supports be made available to accommodate diverse learning needs, especially for students with disabilities and even those English language learners, which in our Brentwood community is a very big part of our community. As parents to our special needs child, my husband and I have been put in a position where we have been discussing the possibility of eliminating her physical therapy, her occupational therapy, and her vision therapy sessions during school hours so that she will not have to be pulled out from class and she can try to keep up with the curriculum. Why should that be something that we have to think about? She should be able to receive the services that she needs without there being a concern of her missing class time or making up time or anything to that nature. There are so many other points that I can speak on, how the anxiety has affected her, how her not wanting to go to school, complaining of headaches, stomach aches, just to stay home. Someone spoke earlier as far as behavioral. My child was never like that. This testing has made her like that. She has lied and said, I don't feel well, because she wants to stay home. My child has already been lost. That was something that was discussed by the First Lady. She's lost. This is not something that should happen to a 5th grader. How she still thinks that she has to sit through extended time for up to 3 hours looking at the ceiling, even though she already knows she's not taking the test this year, that she's refusing them. In the beginning of the year, she was giving an assignment from her teacher, and it said, How do you want to learn this year? What do you want to learn in school this year? And how do you want to do? And she said, I just want to do well on my tests. That's all she said. Nothing about art, nothing about music. It said, I want to make sure I do well on my tests. That was the first week of school coming from a special education child in 5th grade. So, with so many budget cuts that we have, we're losing teachers, we're losing art and music in our district. These were things that gave our kids a break. You know, took them out of the class for a little while, gave them a break from learning. Those things don't exist as much as they did before, or barely, or just not at all for certain age kids in our district. Now these things that are no longer available are not there, but we're still giving more tests and more assessments to our kids. So finally, I'm sorry. This is what is driving myself and my husband as parents to make sure that our child has a fair chance at a good, solid education and a good future, which includes college. I will continue to be an advocate for my daughter and what I feel is best for her, and I will not allow anyone else to tell me what they feel or think is best for my child. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And again, I appreciate your patience as we move through the speakers. And you did quite well for somebody that came up nervous. So. We have Donna Noesi coming up. And after Donna, we're going to go to Dr. Kelly from the Comox School District.
Hi, I would just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and I'm proud to follow Vanessa. I'm also a teacher of special education students. I'm very proud to be a special education teacher in the Middle Country District, and I'm also the parent of 2 children in the Babylon schools. In Middle Country, I teach a self-contained 3rd and 4th grade class, and what that means is that I have only special needs students in my class with me, and they spend all day with me. As a self-contained teacher, many of my students come to me after having not been successful in general ed or in less restrictive special education classes like inclusion. Some of my students have autism, some have intellectual disabilities, some have learning disabilities in the area of reading and math. Sorry, I'm nervous too. At a very young age, some of my students have experienced more heartbreak and failure in school than anyone should experience in a lifetime. I spend my time in my class getting to know my students. I meet with them individually and in small groups. I put a great deal of effort into trying to figure out exactly how each one learns best. I differentiate my teaching. I modify and adapt curriculum. I backtrack when I have to. I find alternative methods to teach and reinforce skills. I use as many games and fun learning activities as I can. I would probably stand on my head if I thought it would help them learn, but that's just me. I spend my year building my students back up, helping them feel good about themselves and proud of their accomplishments, no matter how big or how small. I teach them that success doesn't mean that everyone achieves the exact same thing. Success in my classroom means that if you work hard and show improvement, you're successful. If a 3rd grade student comes to me reading at a kindergarten level and leaves me reading at a 1st grade level, I would call that a success. If that same student leaves me at a 2nd grade level, I would call that a huge success, even though they are still below grade level. I try to help my students realize that they might learn differently than their peers and they might learn at a different pace, but as long as they work hard and try their best, I'm okay with that, and they should be too. They are individuals, and that's what makes them special. Thank you. I share with them words of wisdom from a professor that I had at St. Joseph's College. She always reminded us that fair doesn't mean that everyone gets the same thing. Fair means that everyone gets what they need. But then testing season hits, and I have to force my students, my amazing, hardworking individuals into the same box that all the other children in New York State are expected to get into. And I have to tell you, when I hand out those tests and I watch my students open them and start reading, I can actually see their faces fall. Their eyes well up with tears. Without fail, they will look to me and say things like, "I don't understand this. Can you help me?" Or, "What am I supposed to do?" They ask me these things because they know that I'm always there for them. But this time, I can't help them. I'm not allowed to help them. I tell them that the test doesn't matter and they should just try their best, but they know. They know that their best will not be good enough for these tests. My students have dealt with this for years with the state test. But last year, because of the new Common Core tests, many general education students got a taste of how my students have felt every year on testing day. And I can tell you that as a teacher and as a mother, it was terrible to watch. In the past, as teachers, we used to examine the data from the state tests. We would sit together with grade level colleagues, find the questions that many of the students missed, and then try to analyze why they might have missed them. Sometimes there was an area or topic that needed to be covered more thoroughly in class. Sometimes a distractor answer was very close to the correct answer and the kids got tricked. Sometimes it was just a confusing or poorly worded question. But now, we can't even use the tests for that purpose. The tests are secure. We cannot keep copies to look back on to see what our kids' errors were. We cannot in any way, shape, or form use these tests to help improve or drive our instruction. The only purpose of these tests now is to rate teachers, and the unfortunate side effect of that is that our kids are being damaged in the process. Now, I, like all teachers, do not object to being evaluated. It's very important that I get that point across. But if you want to rate my teaching, come into my classroom, actually watch me teach. Don't force my 8-year-old special needs students to sit through 7 hours of testing that will not give any valid data about my teaching ability, but will make them feel horrible about themselves. These tests are not a true measure of how our teachers are teaching or how our students are learning. My students are so much more than a test score, and our teachers are more than a test score. This current trend of over-testing our kids for the sole purpose of evaluating teachers is abusive, and it has to end. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We do have a couple questions, but I think you certainly hit the nail on the head in terms of the special education side of this,
Yes.
which is obviously something that one of the previous speakers mentioned isn't being talked about as much, but I know it's being talked about by all of you and you, and we appreciate you being here to talk about it because one size fits all doesn't work.
That's right.
And you know, we thank you for being here to advocate for your students who I'm sure we can tell by your passion speaking for them that are being educated well by you.
Thank you.
I know my colleague, Mr. Graff, has a question.
Yeah, I remember when I was at Plattsburgh, some of the stuff we did was field work. So we actually went into a classroom and we observed teachers teaching. And part of my field work was working in a resource room with kids. And what we used to do is be able to work with the teachers in their regular classes to find out what kind of work they were doing, right? And then what we would do is it would be one-on-one teaching to help to find out what problems that the kid was having that they couldn't get to in the classroom, whatever else, especially with a special needs child, and to get them over that hump. So you're in a resource room type
No,
setting?
I'm a self-contained special education class. So it's what they call a 12-1-1. 12 students, 1 teacher assistant. They stay with me all day long, except when they go out for specials.
How is that, what they're doing with you right now, as far as the curriculum, how is that helping you with these special, or how is that prohibiting you as a special ed teacher to really work with the one-on-one
Right. Well, I mean, I work because of the varying natures of the disabilities in my class and their varying levels. I mean, I have kids in my class who are reading anywhere from beginning of kindergarten to almost third grade level. So I have a full range of ability levels in my class. So I try to do most of my work individually with them. The challenge for us in the special needs is that the expectation is that we're teaching the grade appropriate curriculum and also meeting the IEP goals, which are two completely different things, and there's just not enough hours in the day for that.
All right, well, with the inclusion, what they used to do is send aides out to work with the kids.
Right.
And, I mean, how are we doing with that right now?
Well, what I do in my classroom is I do like a group rotation. So I take a group of kids, my teacher assistant takes a group of kids, and then I have a group that will work on some kind of independent activity or on the computer, and then I rotate them around as a way for everyone to try to get what they need. It's like a juggling act.
And this is, the Common Core has made it a lot harder.
Absolutely, because the pacing is so much quicker, and you know the problem is this expectation that we can make all the children reach the same levels, and that's just not possible. The elephant in the room is that it's not possible for all of these kids to do exactly the same thing. I mean, that's Psych 101. You know, when you take Psych 101, you learn about the bell curve of intelligence, and most kids are here, but some kids are here, and some kids are here.
Right. Have some kids actually gone backwards because of the testing and because of the pressure?
Oh, it's just devastating for them. I mean, most of my group last year was second graders. Last year I was second grade and third grade, and my third grader took the ELA and opted out of the math. So he is on the spectrum. He's on the autistic spectrum. He didn't really understand what was going on with the testing, so it didn't really affect him. But in years past, even before the Common Core, the tests affect them because it's too much for them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have Mr. Noesi.
Donna.
We had
Donna.
one, my colleague, Mr. Saladino, had a question for you as well.
So sorry.
Donna, I'd like to start off by saying thank you very much for being here and providing our testimony. You're a highly qualified person to do this.
Thank you.
As a special ed teacher and as a parent. I'm privileged to represent you and your family in Babylon. Can you tell me how your children were doing in class prior to Common Core?
Well, my daughter started kindergarten last year, and I could just speak to the fact of my son, who's in fourth grade, my daughter's now in first grade. I think about their kindergarten experiences and the kinds of things that they used to come home with for homework. My son would come home with homework, find 3 pictures of things that start with the letter C and glue them into your notebook. And my daughter was coming home last year with math homework that was just dots and 7 minus blank equals 3, and she was expected to be able to work that out. And I would work with her, and she would get through it, and she was okay with it, but I feel like we're missing this whole piece with the little kids. Kindergarten is a developmental stage that we can't sacrifice. We can't just push first grade down into kindergarten and think everything's going to be okay. Even if the kids can comprehend it developmentally, it's a detriment to them.
And as a parent who has tremendous insight, obviously, because of your profession and your training and your experience, do you see your son going through a very stressful time now in fourth grade?
I have to say that I think in Babylon we have excellent teachers, and in third grade last year and in fourth grade this year, he never felt stressed. I never felt like he was overly test prepped, like is what's happening in some places. So I don't feel like as a parent I'm dealing with in Babylon the same issues that some other people are, but I think we have, an excellent school district.
I happen to agree. It's a
I'm
wonderful
biased,
school
though.
district. No, it happens to be a wonderful school district.
Right.
The fact that it's smaller and the fact that
Right.
it's such a tight-knit community
Yes.
and that there are very talented people like you living there and working there certainly aid to things. Thank you so much
Thank
for your help
you.
today.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly? And after Dr. Kelly, it'll be Dr. Joseph Rella. Again, I thank you for your patience with us, and thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Dr. John Kelly, and I'm a New York State certified school psychologist and a New York State licensed psychologist. I've worked as a school psychologist in the public schools for the past 27 years. In addition to my work in the schools, I am the legislative chair for the New York Association of School Psychologists, as well as the National Association of School Psychologists Government and Professional Relations chairperson. I have dedicated my career to addressing the mental health and educational needs of today's youth. I want to thank you. In particular, I want to thank Mr. Garbarino, who's my representative, for the opportunity to express my thoughts on the role of high-stakes testing and the psychological impact of these tests on some children. As a school psychologist, one of my areas of expertise is assessment and measurement. Measuring what and how well students learn is an important building block in the process of strengthening and improving our nation's schools. Tests, when used properly, are among the most sound and objective ways to measure student performance. But when test results are used inappropriately or as a single measure of performance, they can have unintended adverse consequences. Test results give classroom teachers important information on how well individual students are learning and provide feedback to the teachers themselves on their teaching methods and curriculum materials. However, it's important to remember that no test is valid for all purposes. Indeed, tests vary in their intended uses and in their ability to provide meaningful assessment of student learning. Therefore, while the goal of using large-scale testing to measure and improve student and school system performance is laudable, it is also critical that such tests are sound, are scored properly, and are used appropriately. Some public officials and educational administrators are increasingly calling for the use of tests to make high-stakes decisions, such as when a student will receive additional academic supports. School officials using such tests must ensure that students are tested on a curriculum that they have a fair opportunity to learn, so that certain subgroups of students, such as racial and ethnic minority students, or students with disabilities or limited English proficiency, are not systematically excluded or disadvantaged by the test or the test-taking conditions. Furthermore, high-stakes decisions should not be made on the basis of a single test score, because a single test can only provide a snapshot of a student's achievement and may not accurately reflect an entire year's worth of student progress and achievement. In fact, test development experts agree that it is not appropriate to use performance on a single standardized test for making high-stakes decisions for individuals. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, that you have a beautiful flower in front of you, and I give you a tape measure to evaluate that flower. Yes, you'll be able to tell me the height of that flower, but will you be able to tell me how that flower smells, whether it will continue to flourish, or the environmental factors that influence the flower's growth? And yet, this is what we want from our high-stakes testing. Multiple stakeholders want assessments to meet a variety of needs. Educators want test results to inform instruction. Taxpayers want to know that the money they spend translates into student learning. And governors want assurance that their students are achieving at a level similar or better than students in other states. Yet we know that tests should be designed for the specific purpose that they are intended to serve and for the population that they will measure. However, New York State continues to use single tests for multiple purposes of system accountability, school improvement, and measurement of individual student or group performance, regardless of their intended use and inherent limitations. In efforts to quickly meet new mandates, this inappropriate practice is likely to increase. Now let me turn my attention to another area of expertise of school psychologists. That is the emotional well-being of children and youth. I'm not here to propose to you that all testing has an emotional impact upon children or that all testing is bad. However, one of the first things that I learned in my assessment course in graduate school was that there are multiple factors which influence the results of tests. Certainly, a child's physical and emotional state are significant factors which impact the outcome of any assessment. So let us stop for a moment and discuss kind of an interesting development which directly relates to children's emotional reactions to state tests. I ask you, since when did lessons in stress management and coping with test anxiety become standard components of teacher preparation for standardized tests? Why is this necessary? And as I was preparing this testimony, it was almost like a scripted moment. At that moment that I wrote down, why is this necessary, I received a knock at my door. It was a young girl who came to me, and she was in tears. She explained that she was highly stressed and feeling overwhelmed by the pressures that she was experiencing in school. This is a high-achieving international baccalaureate student who felt as though she was cracking after years of intense pressure and scrutiny in the schools. This outcome is not surprising when you take notice of the children's reactions leading up to state tests after completing these tests. Many children, beginning as young as 7 and 8 years old, spending 3 hours over multiple days for multiple tests over multiple years, are simply worn out by the time they reach the high school level. We've heard the stories about children experiencing nightmares, becoming physically ill, or simply breaking down crying in the days leading up to the state tests. As school psychologists, we have seen children display clinically significant levels of anxiety pre and post state testing. When groups of parents, teachers, and principals recently shared students' experience in their schools, especially during the ELA exam with misjudged timing expectations, we learned that frustration and despondency were common reactions among students. The extremes were unprecedented: vomiting, nosebleeds, suicidal ideation, and even hospitalization. As I often say to the interns that I supervise, don't test for testing's sake. Test for meaning. Test for purpose. Make sure that the instruments that you are using will answer the questions that you are asking. Stress and anxiety are normal parts of our lives, but as adults, we learn to address factors that contribute to these emotional states. Sometimes it's a matter of simply removing that factor from our lives. And while some parents are choosing that route for their child by opting out of state tests, the vast majority of children remain subject to these events. Therefore, as the leaders in education, we hold not only the learning process, but also the social and emotional development of children and youth in our hands. We must ensure that any action taken is mindful of both intended and unintended consequences. So I ask, is testing necessary? Yes, it is. Is the current type of testing and the sheer volume necessary? Well, I would propose to you that's the challenge that you must analyze and take a close look at. I've included in my written comments some specific recommendations from the National Association of School Psychologists, guidelines for large-scale assessment, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, Dr. Kelly. Again, some of the things that you're seeing from your students coming in, are you experiencing students with self-mutilation coming in also with the testing requirements and stuff? Are you seeing an increase in that?
It's tough to draw a direct correlation to say it's because of the increased testing and the demands. I can certainly agree with the first doctor that was here that spoke about the increased mental health needs of children in general. And the children in our schools have significant needs at this point in time. When you talk about 1 in 5 children having some type of mental health issue that significantly impacts upon their daily functioning, we're talking about a large percentage of our students. So you add on additional stressors, as we've heard and was so eloquently expressed by the parent, and those are certainly additional stressors that we need to be mindful of and make sure that when we do testing, we're doing it in a way that doesn't add to those unintended consequences.
Right. So there's an increase, though, in students that are seeking help.
Absolutely.
All right. And it's a large percentage? Or
large.
And the correlation is when we started giving these tests, right, when Common Core is really being implemented, did you see a rise?
I think what we saw was a rise in children reacting to the type of testing that they were subjected to, particularly this past spring. We saw quite a few children reacting negatively, reacting with the anxiety symptoms, reacting as if they weren't prepared to take those tests.
And has it leveled out at all, or are we it's still on the rise, or it's still about the same? because they're facing new testing requirements, or just the way that the educational experience has changed for them?
You know, again, I'd like to take a broader viewpoint and say I think that it's reflection of the type of stress that our children are under in society. And so I think that what we're seeing happening in the schools is, yes, children have significantly more mental health needs than we have seen in the past.
Thank you.
Doctor, what's driving that increase in the need for these services from these children? Can you elaborate on that? What are those social factors? You've been doing this for 27 years. What is the difference today from when you first started?
I think that you know, our children are often a reflection upon family environment, and we certainly know that our families are under significantly more stress, economic stress, demands that are placed upon them, and so I think certainly factors related to family are driving significant difficulties with children.
So if they're I had a conversation with a teacher, a friend of mine, he said when a child's performance drops significantly, for example, when there's a divorce going on in the family, is that the most prevalent problem in terms of family difficulties? Is it?
You know, I think if we had to take a look at the most prevalent problem, I think it's economic stress, to be very honest with you. You know, there are what we call barriers to learning. And those are simply factors that are beyond the control of any teacher in that classroom. And those are factors, you know, we sometimes say kids come into that classroom with a backpack full of issues that have nothing to do with the learning environment. And it was said earlier that, you know, a child coming in with all of these issues, you can lay out the best curriculum, you can have the best teacher in there, but unless you address those issues with that child, the education is just not going to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Joseph Rella. And just Brian Buckley, you'll be next.
Good evening. My name is Joe Rella. I'm the superintendent of Comstock School District in Port Jeff Station. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to offer some remarks this evening. The grades 3 to 8 math test results were released in early August. As we are all aware, they showed about 30% of the students in New York State passing, about 70% failed. And that had been predicted months before the test had actually even been given. Since then, the State Education Department has put out a lot of information about the value of these results, setting a new baseline, raising the bar, increasing rigor. Our students now finally had a chance to be college and career ready. At the same time as all that was going on, the outrage of parents and educators has been growing exponentially, daily. It's become more and more organized, unstoppable. And this outrage has nothing to do with the curriculum, the metrics of the test, the setting of a passing score. It springs from something much more basic and much more serious. The tests are hurting our children. Children across the state are experiencing increased levels of anxiety, stress, behavioral problems, sleep deprivation, respiratory issues, and in the worst cases, self-abusive and self-destructive behaviors. Children are experiencing this. The central issue is that the tests are hurting our children. It has not been addressed. It has never been addressed. It has never been acknowledged as a possibility. not even been met with contempt. The proponents of this initiative have flooded the media with a tidal wave of rhetoric about the benefits of the Common Core, but not word one has been spoken about the devastating effects on our children and our most vulnerable children, those with special needs, those where English is not their first language, are being hurt the most. Any test that's designed to have 70% of the students taking it fail is abusive. Diane Ravitch, and I consider her a beacon of truth in this time, huh? She put it this way: tests created and slanted to fail 70% of students are destructive and purposeful. Every parent of children from the 70% worries about the short and long-term harm caused by labeling the child as a failure and a loser. Every parent of the children from the 30%, those that passed, worries about the short and long-term harm caused by the stress and the possibility of future failure inflicted by this profit-motivated, high-stakes testing movement. Students, young students, are discouraged. They doubt themselves. They don't like coming to school. This is a lesson that they are learning daily. This is a bad lesson. It's crushing their spirit. Our rich curriculum has effectively been narrowed down to two subjects, ELA and math. There's not much time for much else. This hasn't been done by educators. It's been done by amateurs. And our children have become guinea pigs in a horrible experiment. There are two things I'd like to leave you with. First, I ask you to please remember that while we're sitting here tonight, students have already started this year's round of testing and test prep to get them ready for the central act of the school year, which is now the tests in April. They are in classrooms across the state being hammered by this every day. The second thing, and it refuses to leave my mind, is an assumption. Let's assume that we've been wrong about everything we have experienced with this initiative. Let's assume that the Common Core initiative, its implementation, and its testing are perfect. That it's the best thing that's happened to public education anywhere at any time. Now think about the devastating effects that it's having on children, on their mental and physical health, on their self-concept and self-definition, on their families, on their teachers and administrators, and on their families. Given these destructive effects, even if it were perfect, it has to go. In the meantime, the first step is to stop the tests now. Stop them, fix them, if they can be fixed. If they can't, throw them out, scrap them. You are the only ones who can do this, our legislature. We have no say. We've never been consulted. There's no feedback loop in this whole process. An initiative was put forth, a treatment, if you will, to cure the ills, alleged, but to cure the ills. One would think that something this important, first of all, would have been rolled out in a better manner. But let's put that aside. It is what it is. It's here now. So it's introduced. Now anybody, a mechanic working on your car, would stop and wait and say, is it working? Doesn't sound better. A doctor, imagine a doctor giving you a medicine saying, take this, I know what's wrong, without asking you what's wrong. And you're not getting better, just keep taking it. Imagine a treatment that had a side effect of 70% of the patients dying. It would at least prompt the person prescribing the treatment to stop and take a look at it. That's not even happening. It's not even a question. Please help us. We need your help for the sake of our children. Huh? Thank you.
Joe, I had the privilege of coming to your school, right, when parents came out in the droves. And one of the things that I'd like to put out in front of everybody is, you know, they look at you as a leader of this movement, one of the leaders of this movement. And I keep trying to tell people, you have to look behind, because it's the parents that are pushing.
Absolutely.
It's 100% all the parents. I know you went to Westchester. I went to Westchester. This is all over the state, and parents are pushing back. And I don't know if I stole this from you or not. I know you know. But when I talk to parents and they get discouraged, one of the things I try to say to them is one person in the crowd can be drowned out. But many people in the crowd, all saying the same thing at the same time, can't be ignored. Right? And what I see is parents are coming out in the forefront. They're calling their legislators. They're calling the governor's office. They're calling everyone. And one of the things I've been saying when I talk to other public officials, and especially higher public officials, is that don't focus on the messenger. Focus on the message. You better start paying attention, and you better start listening, because this is not going away.
No.
One quick question. We've spoken before. You clearly have a tremendous handle on this issue. What would you like to see specifically done at the legislative level? And also, what would you like to see specifically done at the community PTA level, parental level?
At the legislative level, you're the only ones that can make this. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be, you have to stop it first, though. We can debate all these other points, the quality of the curriculum. It's not developmentally appropriate in many cases. A whole bunch of issues. But certainly those things need to be scrutinized. Remember, from 4 days of testing in April, there have been a lot of inferences made about teachers, about schools, and about children. Those inferences have never been subject to any scrutiny. That should happen. It should have happened before, but it should definitely happen now. But that can take a long time. In the meantime, children are still getting hammered here. That needs to stop now. It's as if you had a timeout. Let's put a stop. Now let's look at it. All right? I don't know if it can be fixed, because it was created by people who thought that they had an idea about education. I went to a few doctors in my time. It doesn't mean I can waltz into the operating room at Mather and start doing surgery. If you take a look at any of the standards, the list of people who contributed to them, you don't see teachers on there. You don't see child development specialists on there. Why? Why? And you know, somebody said before, you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Conspiracies happen in secret. This is right in our faces. This is right in our faces. So the first thing, I think that the legislature, if they could, similar to what Florida did, we're stopping this right now. Now we got to examine the heck out of this thing. I think once it's subject to scrutiny, I don't believe it can stand. I don't believe it can. It's not apparent that any of the standards have any research associated with them. You know, again, we hear these are benchmarked against national, international, intergalactic standards. I don't see them. Why don't you show them to me? I got a very good education in the state of New York. Believe it or not, prior to this crowd coming in, people did learn in the state of New York. I'm very proud of the education I got. I got to also, I'm sure you're aware, we're not allowed as school officials to talk about people opting out. We can't tell them to do it. I can say that if I had children this age, they wouldn't be near these tests. My grandchildren aren't near these tests. But that's me talking, just like you said, Al. This has nothing to do with me. This all started with me because somebody overheard my conversation with my community. This was not something I put out there. It seemed to resonate. I didn't know. Somebody sends me an email, you're speaking for me. I said, no, I'm not. I'm speaking for me to Comstock. But then it took on a life of its own. And now that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's unstoppable. Parents now, the mistake, and it's a critical mistake, is that they've angered the mothers of this state. God help them.
And the other?
Then the second step is, for communities, we have to, Al's also 100% right. 1,000 voices whispering is a huge sound, huh? And we can no longer. And what this has also done is it's awakened people. Most people are too busy trying to survive to worry about what's going on in schools. They trust our schools. They trust what we do. They trust our teachers. Our teachers are trusted with children in a classroom with a closed door, but they're not trusted to grade an exam? Whose idea is that? They have to mobilize and speak together. This is representative democracy. I mean, I've been invited into our government class to talk about it because this is the way it happens. This is government working. The other issue with this thing, and it's one that most disturbing to me, is that private business is setting public policy. Public policy is not set by private business. You set public policy in consultation with the electorate. I thought that's what I learned when I learned history before the Common Core, though. So when I learned history, it was you have a right as a citizen to speak with your elected representatives and bring your grievances to them. That's in the Bill of Rights. It's a mess. And while the mess gets sorted out, we can't continue to have the kids suffering for it, huh?
Right. And the one thing I want to point out, if you watch Channel 4 News lately...
Now I won't look at it.
Yeah, I know. But they keep talking about the Massachusetts model, which is totally different than what we're doing here. Totally different.
Also, just so you know, in Massachusetts, charter schools are very few, number one. They don't have merit pay, number two. All the things that are touted as the solutions. Again, I believe if I have a good product, whatever it is, and you say to me, let me see it. Show me how good it is. What do I have to be afraid of? Why would I not show everybody my product? But in this case, we're not even allowed to see a completed test of what value is an exam. Examinations are only valuable because they teach us what the children have learned and where we need to reteach things. They didn't get that. I got to try that. Teachers do that all the time. Regents have been around since right after the Civil War. I wasn't going to school then, but I took regents in this state. I never had a nervous breakdown. I had to be worried about my mother, but that was about the only problem I had. This is I don't want to say it's a manufactured crisis, but I'm going to say it. It's a manufactured crisis here.
Yeah, my point, Joe, was that though Channel 4 and the rest of them, right, I think people have to go out there and demand that the press start paying attention too. Because we've invited
they didn't
the
advertise
whole...
this, Al.
Yeah, we invited
I know.
every single press
I know.
outlet out here, and they're telling one side of the story, and it's not the right side.
Well, I got to tell you, I stopped talking to them.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Brian Buckley. There's no testimony, it's just a card. Last call, Brian Buckley. Okay. Ms. Jared Behar. Oh, I'm sorry. Come on up. Huh? Yeah, who write these things? It says Ms. Who made these? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jared Behar. I'm a parent of a first grader, a 6-year-old in the Comac School District. I appreciate you giving me the time to talk today, and I want to thank these honorable assembly members for giving me the chance to discuss my concerns with the excessive testing that's really taking place on New York's youngest students. I asked my son, and I'm not going to read my statement, but I did ask my son this morning. I said, I'm going to talk to the people that make the laws for our state, and I'm going to talk to them about the testing that you've been telling me about. What do you want me to tell them? And he said, I hate it. He said, tell them I hate it. And he said, I'm going to be mad at you if you don't tell them. So hopefully he'll be able to see this and he'll know that I did that. My son is a bright boy. He loves school. He loves going to school. He loves doing his work. He loves to read. So the fact that he tells me he hates something at school is a big deal to me, and I listen. He, going through kindergarten, going through first grade, has been getting a great education in Comac, but kindergarten, first grade, these early years, they're supposed to be about socialization. They're supposed to be about fostering his creativity and fostering his imagination. And he's being pulled out of the classroom to sit in front of a computer with a pair of headphones on to use a mouse that I think until he took that test, he had never used a mouse before. And they left him there and they said, okay, take this test. He had no idea what he was doing. So I understand why he hates it. It's a scary proposition for a child to do. And you're taking him out of the classroom. I said to him, why do you hate it? He said, because I want to be in the class. I want to be with my friends. I want to be with my teacher. And I want to be learning the things that they're teaching me in class. And he's missing out on that to take this silly electronic test. And the problem is that it's not even being used for anything, especially at K through 2. I go and I meet with the teachers and I sit down to assess, my son's performance, and they're not showing me test results and saying, oh, well, he did very good on this map test that he took in the computer. No, they're showing me the work product that he did in class, and more importantly, they're sharing with me the first person impressions that they've had for having him in the classroom and discussing what he's doing well, where he needs to get better. And what you're doing now is you're removing him from that environment, the very environment that's giving him the chance to excel, to go forward, to improve, and you're taking him out of that for something that's essentially useless. So I can't understand that, and I don't know why you would subject students that young to that level of testing. It makes no sense to me at all. I'll tell you, last year when he was in kindergarten, they have this weekly gathering, and he was the star of the week. So we went, and they were honoring him, and the second grade was missing. So the second grade was gone because they were out for an entire morning of testing. So you're taking second graders, 7 and 8-year-olds, out of the school building for an entire morning of testing. They're missing their community gathering. For what? It makes no sense to me. And one thing that I know that there's a bill that's passed the assembly that has the goal of removing this K through 2 testing. So I applaud the assembly for that, and I hope that the things that have been said today and what I'm telling you now maybe give you some ammunition to convince your brethren in the Senate to move forward with that bill. The other problem that I have is that I understand that there is an invasion of privacy aspect to all of this testing, that we have commercial standardized testing companies that are then getting the data of our 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds in addition to the other students, and then they're able to use that for commercial purposes. Not only that, once it's out there, I mean, we all know in this age, once that information's out there, you can't rein it back in. do we as a state want to allow private companies to own the data of our little children? It makes no sense to me. So, and the other thing too that I'll say is, you know, my son is 6 years old. I'm going to ask him, you know, hopefully he's sleeping now when I get home, but tomorrow morning I'm going to ask him if he knows what Machu Picchu is, and we'll find that out. But he's got his whole life to be tethered to a device. What I love about the education that he's receiving is that he's in the classroom and he's interacting with people, he's learning to socialize, he's exercising his imagination. To pull him out, to sit him in front of a computer with a pair of headphones for a half an hour at a time really just seems inappropriate. So I want to thank the members of this committee for giving me the chance to speak. Thank you very much.
I want to, number one, sorry about earlier, and I thank you for your patience waiting to testify. I read the card in front of me. Maybe Pearson prepared it. I don't know. Just a question. I know you mentioned what your son told you about the testing. What are you hearing from him as he begins the new school year in terms of just the pace of classroom inspection? Is he coming home with instruction? Is he coming home with similar impressions of that as well, that they're moving quickly on things, that it's discouraging him about the learning?
Insofar as that his classroom work, no. It hasn't affected him in the classroom because I think that the Comac School District has done a good job of lessening the intrusiveness of these testing to the best of their ability. And I do applaud them on that because he comes home with his work, and this is actually the funny, he comes home with his homework and he wants to do his homework. He gets a math sheet and there's the side he has to do and then there's the optional side. He does both without having to be told to do the optional side. He loves school, he loves learning. He took a test, his first test in first grade, and he was very excited to take his first test. But these tests, he's not excited about. They're not engaging in any way, shape, or form. So the way that I see in terms of the classwork that he comes home with, and then the dichotomy between what he tells me about the standardized testing that he's taking, it really brings to bear the difference in these testing and how hands-on, instructional, creative learning from his teacher at a personal level is good, and these standardized testing that he's being forced to take are bad.
Yeah, and it would certainly seem to me that any type of new testing, new pieces of everything should kind of fit seamlessly in with that other stuff, and clearly that's not happening with this testing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything? Thank you very much. Okay. I think those were all the people who were originally submitted testimony. So now we have a few people that came in today. Now we're going to start just calling them up. Maria Elena Maza. Just so you're aware, Veronica Heisman will be next.
Hello.
Good evening.
My name is Maria Elena Maza, and I've been teaching for 25 years. I taught kindergarten, first grade, was the math, science, technology teacher in my school, and now I'm currently teaching second grade. So I've been around for a while to see how it used to be and how it is now. In Three Village, just as the gentleman mentioned in Comac, we try to lessen the blow as much as possible. I can say that 2 years ago, when all of this was introduced, I had many children that came in with some with disabilities, some had maybe ADHD, different disorders. Yet I could see in every one of them a gift that I wanted to nourish and build upon. But when the testing came about, I had one little boy whose thought process far surpassed anybody in the classroom. I would say something and he would respond in a way that no other child would respond. And I know that that child's going to be somebody someday. But when I found out that these tests are what was going to measure whether or not this student was a success, I was devastated. And the first thing I said to that parent was, I'm sorry, your child is a genius, but you're not going to see that. And that's really what brought me here today. I'm going to read what I wrote. Just basically it's saying what everybody else said. I wrote, as an educator, I started out excited about the Common Core. I thought that some of the new ideas were great and saw how students could benefit. I was enthusiastic and ready to try new strategies. I never imagined the Common Core and AAPR would roll out the way it did. We need to stop this and change our direction. Within 1 year, children were suddenly expected to be a couple of levels above the level that the top students normally were. We were almost looking at each other like, really? That's where they have to be by the end of the year? The pace was moving way too quickly. Teachers were not given time to prepare or train. Programs after the year started, and teachers were actually scored on how well they taught without training and with the criteria changed before students had a chance to learn it. Testing became the priority. The tests that came out were pretty scary. I don't think those tests determine who's above or below level. I predicted a train wreck 2 years ago. Why couldn't the education department predict that? I keep telling myself that I'll just do my job and ignore everything around me, and that's what I still keep telling myself. In addition to all that was mentioned above, the climate being set is not a climate that nurtures students. As I mentioned, we have geniuses in many areas, not just math or science. And my goal as a teacher is to find that in a student. If we want to improve education, the money has to be spent on providing teachers with the best training and the best resources so that we can teach and reach every child. A positive climate produces collegiality and the desire to do the best. Teachers learn best from the best teachers in the field. We learn best from master teachers. Master teachers must be current and living the reality of the classroom. The climate the government is creating promotes competition. This is not in the students' best interests. Our government wants us to compete and produce like we're selling hair products. Children are not hair products. If we share the best lessons and we work together, everybody benefits. Somebody mentioned before, teachers now have merit pay. If I do the best, I make the most money. So I'm not going to tell Susie down the hallway what I'm doing because I want the most money. We don't want that. We want to, when I started, teachers just opened up to one another, shared what they had, did the best for students, and it was wonderful. It's the wrong climate. It's the wrong place that we're going. I fear for my own son. If Einstein lived by today's standards, he would be a failure. We need to look at each child's gifts and work to help them grow. Only then will we have the best people leading our country. And I'm glad I got to at least say that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Veronica Heisman. And Ms. Heisman will be followed by Melissa McMullen.
Hi, good evening. I wasn't sure, I'm a speech pathologist, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be here as a mom or as an educator, but I'm going to be here as a mom because my daughter was an 8th grader, wrote something. She's a very bright child. She is ADHD and attentive type. She's taking Regents Science and Regents Math this year. She, by all standards, is a great student. She's got a 89 average to 90 average. She's really bright. And this Common Core nonsense, it's not just this year. It started in 6th grade. 5th grade, the test scores were manipulated. We didn't get the scores till August. So these test scores, the ELA, the math, it didn't just start now. It's been ongoing. This year, she wanted to pull out of algebra. She was having a tough time, and I'm going to read what she wrote. She said, "This year I'm in 8th grade in Common Core algebra. It is very difficult, not only because it's an advanced class, but because the language and overall work is hard. They are trying to change the way we think. by kind of forcing it into our heads. They also give us a ton of work, not only for homework, which takes me about an hour and a half, but also as classwork. The teacher expects us to understand all the new things right away, but we usually don't. My teacher doesn't usually go over our classwork, not because she doesn't want to, because she simply doesn't have the time. Last year, I thought I was a good student in math. I was almost the top of my class, but now I'm close to the bottom. I'm not only struggling, some of the most intellectual kids in my class are too. Also, some of the kids who just made it are really struggling because they had the cutoff, they lowered the cutoff for algebra, and I think it's partly in, if you don't take it in 8th grade, you will not get through the whole math sequence the way this is structured. So if you want to take calculus and you're looking towards a scientific field or whatever, you can't take it, because if you don't start now, you will not make it through the whole sequence. So they sort of push some of the kids through that might have been in 8th grade math. As a parent, I go to the PTA meetings. I'm concerned that in math, she's going to, right now, the way I understand it, is taking the 8th grade math assessment, because they're teaching 8th grade math and Regents algebra together in my district. I'm in Connecticut, so they have extra periods. She's going to take the Common Core Regents, and she's going to take the regular Regents. And they say that the regular Regents our students will do far better on, so it really behooves them to take both. 3 tests for 1 subject. That's absurd. There should be 1 measure, and 1 measure only, of the content of her coursework and not of this other stuff. I think I give tests for a living. I'm a speech therapist. My tests are standardized. They're scrutinized by peers in the field. None of this is based on cognitive level. None of this is based on language development. It's thrown in. They're asking, especially the youngest kids, to do reasoning and processing that's not in the developmental realm of natural child development, the way things go. And this has to end. You know, and now you're doing it to my middle school child, who should be, she's a musical student. She should be able to enjoy all these things. She doesn't want to sign up for anything extra. She goes to bed at 10 o'clock. She takes, every parent at the open school night last week was complaining about the amount of time 1 subject is taking. You know, and you have 5 main subjects in middle school, and you know what? You can't devote that much time to math. I'm going to speak now from my hat as a professional, because you know, I have to address this. You know, it's flawed. Common Core is flawed in 3 major ways. First, it's driven by influential business people such as Bill and Melinda Gates, and they feel that we need, or they have a need or and the federal government, and they think that our kids should be going somewhere, that they're not college ready. They have a vision for our students to be in the college and the workforce. Well, they already are. You know, there are plenty of people on Long Island. We have a huge, talented workforce here, produce, you know, products of all these school districts. So I don't think that that is, you know, should be a main concern. And they're not giving the educators in the trenches an opportunity to develop the program. They're just throwing it out there, whether it's got any, you know, statistical research or background. They're just throwing it out there. And you know what, from a language development perspective, my husband and I sit with my daughter with the word problems from the math program for the Regents math. They're making them tricky. Do you want to know if my kid can do a real life situation, or do you want to put the wording so convoluted that my kid sits there and says, this is tricky? My kid shouldn't have to say that this is tricky. The words should, you know, you teach them the vocabulary, whatever, you teach them how to approach the problem. Don't make it tricky. What's the purpose? I want my child to learn algebra, to use it. You know what, that's the 1 subject they use all the time. I use algebra, you know, all the time for real life stuff. And I want her to really like it. She loved math, she loved learning. She went in on her own to try to get out of the Regents class, and our counselor said no, because he's wise, he knows she can do it. You know, but I have a child who cuts herself the 2nd week of school. After 8 months of not cutting herself, cuts on her wrists. I can't fight this, you know. I want to opt her out of the tests that are not necessary, and I'm told by my district that it will impact the district, because if you don't have 95%, it puts you under the radar, and there are things that the district will have to do and all this other nonsense. And I don't particularly care as far as that goes. I mean, only necessary tests. Test on what my kid is taught, and don't test them on nonsense and what you think they should do, or SAT material that they're not ready for. It's just not appropriate. The other thing is these tests, I just got my tests last week, the scores. My daughter hasn't seen them, and I'm not showing them to her because they really have no meaning. It doesn't tell me anything. You know, and she did better than 50, and she's, I guess, in the 52nd percentile or whatever. So she, you know, she did pretty well relative to what the rest of the state's saying. But you know what? I'm not letting her be measured by a test score. You know, that is not it. If it was a test that's on the subject she just did, you know, this week's math or whatever, fine. You know it, you don't know it, you see the weaknesses, but this is just arbitrary. The other thing is that the curriculum itself, there's a lot of testing. She takes a quiz and a test every week almost in these subjects, and it's starting to get a little ridiculous. The more time is spent taking those tests in the class than there is on the actual curriculum. And they're gonna end and start doing these final, the Common Core test is the beginning of June, which means you know that come May, that's, you know, not a lot of new stuff's gonna have to be introduced. They're gonna have to start prepping for review for this test. So you're losing almost a month of actual classroom time with this whole process. I'm sorry. Probably, again, the most concerning to me is that this curriculum is not developmental. It is not cognitively developmental, the way children develop their learning and their processing skills. We are asking them to be abstract thinkers before it's their time. We're taking away the very things that make them learn to be more abstract thinkers, the play, the interaction, the discovery part of elementary school by doing projects and things with your peers and fun stuff, and we're relegating it to, we must get this done in this amount of time because we got to cover all this curriculum because come April, we're taking tests, you know, and that's what the teachers are worrying about. I think that it's just inappropriate, and from a language perspective, again, reading the questions, a lot of the questions are way above the language level and the experience of kids. And, you know, I've been reading a lot of the elementary stuff, what you read before about the questions, that's not for an elementary school child. They need to learn about the community first and then learn about the rest of the world. That, you know, the rest of the world will be there, but they need to learn about what's around them, and that's what they relate to. They're not going to relate to something far away and abstract like that because that's not how their minds work. You know, I just ask that you represent us. I'm glad that we have a voice, you know, and as a parent, like I said, I'm scared. My 8th grader is really thrown into the brunt of this. The 8th graders this age, they're going to be the worst of it all because they have to take all the Common Core tests before they graduate, and that's going to be the measure of whether they get into a school or not is those tests. And I don't want that to be. I want her to enjoy school. I want her to love it. I don't want her to ask to get out of a class because she sees the handwriting on the wall, that she's doing an hour and a half of homework, going to bed at 10 o'clock, getting up at 6 o'clock. There's more to life than that, and I don't want to teach her the lesson, you know, they're making them workaholics. This is not Russia. This is not China. This is not some, you know, Western world country. This is America, and I want it to stay the way it is. I want education to be just the way it is now and, you know, not add all this other stuff that's not appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa McMullen. And Margaret Gregory will be after Melissa.
Good evening. My name is Melissa McMullen. I am a teacher. I've been a teacher for 12 years in Comstock School District. Prior to that, I was in business for 10 years. I was a store manager. I was a buyer for Caldor, if you remember Caldor. And I also became a manufacturer. I went into wholesale sales. And then I became a teacher 12 years ago because I felt strongly in my heart that I had the capabilities to make a difference. Over the years, my students and I have constructed Mesopotamian ziggurats. We've met with award-winning editorial cartoon artist Walt Handelman to share their political cartoons, and Paleolithic anthropologist Dr. John Shea to understand what early stone tools teach us about the development of mankind. We worked on a collaborative online learning experience with the homeless and helped open a school in Haiti after the earthquake. We actually went to Haiti. The school is still there. Those real learning experiences based upon the interests of my students are being driven away by assessments and standards that are so far removed from my students that I am faced with students who cry in 6th grade during the 3rd week of school because the math curriculum the state has written, not me, makes them feel dumb despite 2 to 3 hours per day I spend trying to rewrite the curriculum to suit their needs. I am also the mother of 4 school-age children in grades 1 through 5. My 1st grader came home from school the 2nd week of school crying because he had a 2-hour exam spread over 2 days that in his mind determined he was the dumbest kid in his class. This was a G-rate exam written by Pearson, purchased by my local school district to administer as a pretest for its teacher evaluation plan. My son has been made to feel a failure in 1st grade, and this test is designed only to measure his teachers, not him. NYSED's current assessment program duplicates information we already have. It costs local school districts hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement and a significant number of days of learning lost. Most teachers utilize Fountas and Pinnell's guided reading benchmark system with training conducted by Teachers College at Columbia University. This system is consistent across buildings as well as districts and tracks student reading abilities from year to year. My co-teacher and I sat down to look at our students' guided reading levels from the previous year. We compared them with the 2014 ELA scores, which were not available until several months after the benchmark testing had been conducted. Across every single student, the benchmark score matched the ELA score. Poverty, with its socioeconomic implications, is the elephant in the room. Look at Long Island school districts and compare scores. Test scores could have been extrapolated before the exam was even created. One could look at the percentage of economically disadvantaged students in school districts and determine NYSED passing rates by looking at the 2 numbers inversely. The passing rate increases as the number of economically disadvantaged students decreases. We need assessments and curriculum that target the disparity in academic performance between rich and poor rather than shining a spotlight on poverty. As an aside, I want to share with you, I ask my principal each year, please give me your most struggling readers. I want to take them, I want to work with a co-teacher so that they have the benefit of 2 teachers. I want to be able to design curriculum that's going to meet their needs. And guess what I got handed last Thursday after the Paleolithic anthropologist spent an hour with my students? I was told I'm a 1. I was told I am a 1 out of 20. Is this the message you want to send to teachers who are giving their heart and soul during the day? I stay up till midnight. I get up at 4:30. And if you want to ignore perhaps what I'm going through, think about my children, because my 1 was representative of their scores. And you know something? I'll keep taking the 1. They can give me a 0 next year. I'm going to keep taking the kids who need me the most. But sooner or later, you're going to be turning teachers away. This all does very little. The issue is, what does NYSED do with these tests after they're administered? If they knew 70% were going to fail before the exam was administered, what were they thinking? You can look at the passing score over the last several years. If they want to show students are doing well, they lower the bar. When they want to show the students not doing so well, then they raise the bar really high. Teachers are not afraid of standards. We're not afraid of being evaluated. I welcome it and encourage it. We need assessments that are going to help us guide our own instruction. In closing, just as a parent, I want you to know I do refuse testing for all of my children. There's absolutely no way I would allow my students to sit through a test that's not going to do anything that is going to support their growth. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Margaret Gregory. Margaret Gregory?
Mark Jacket. One more time, Mark Jacket. Okay. Those are the final two cards I have in front of me. Is there anybody in the room who submitted a card to speak who hasn't been called upon? Okay. Well, number one, I thank all the speakers for their patience as we were trying to move through the list today. As I said, we wanted to do our best to allow them to give their testimony, to allow questions without cutting anybody off. So I think we achieved that, and hopefully, the speakers feel it was worth waiting for the opportunity to address us. We certainly appreciate you doing so. As I mentioned at the beginning, and I'll mention it again, this is the first of a series of forums that we're conducting. Just in case we didn't make it clear at the beginning, these forums are being conducted by the New York State Assembly Minority Conference. They're being conducted by our conference, although certainly if some of our majority members wanted to join us, we'd welcome them. But they're being conducted by us as the minority because despite our request from the members of the Education Committee on our side of the aisle for hearings to be held on this subject, we have not gotten an answer to that request. So as a result, we felt that certainly this is an issue that is so important that it shouldn't be ignored, and that we needed to conduct these forums. We have another one in 2 weeks in Nassau County, and in the coming weeks after that, in November, we are going to be going up to Buffalo. We're going to be on Staten Island, going up to some of the areas upstate, and making sure we give an opportunity to educators, parents, professionals to come and address us, and that we can put together the best recommendations possible to the rest of our colleagues on the committee, so that we make sure that our voices, and more importantly your voices, are not ignored on this subject. With that, I'm ready to close, but I do want to thank our staff. Several of us have staff from our district offices that are helping out. We have our regional office staff who helped put this together. And we have staff members who came down from Albany today to assist us, especially on the technical end, making sure we could live stream this, and that we will have a video that we will be able to put up online after the fact. So that's a very important part, so that we make sure anybody who wanted to see the testimony today has the opportunity to do so. So we thank the staff for their hard work on that, and our minority leader, Brian Kolb, for lending the staff of his office to help us set this up. Al, do you have anything to close? Okay. Thank you very much.